in our opinion, it is what we are ending. We're ending this cycle. In this video and maybe 2 more, we want to end this series about the shape of the Earth's cosmos, its function, because we consider it to be the most important series that we are making. And we also believe, because we can't find any other channel that is broadcasting, which we consider very important. Very important because we are focusing not only on the explanatory physical part of this whole reality, but in parallel. And it cannot be otherwise, because the spiritual part, because simply the spiritual and the material are different degrees of density, no more, no less. So we want that in these 3 videos we have tried looking for a translator. Well, automatic, well, also make let's say a parallel, well, exposure for the English language. So in these 3 videos we do a synthesis of all the above. Therefore, these last 3 videos can also serve as the beginning of this series that we have had to reach just over 100 videos. Because in that way the person will be able to have an initial idea. So this is the title that we are going to develop as a quick compilatory synthesis that the person, well, it can give you an approximate general idea, and then if you are interested and believe that it can be, as we believe, the simplest and deepest model of this reality, which above all empowers us mentally and spiritually and psychologically, well then, well, you can go referring to the viruses in this series, which, as we say, we have had to exceed 100. So this is it. A first approximate image of this model, then say first of all that simply this model, so where does it start? Where does it originate, both physically and spiritually? Well, in an inner impulse. And this is very important because everything comes from the inside out. And who will produce this impulse? Well, we say the invisible hands of the source, which are electromagnetic forces that also orient this whole reality, and that we perceive it in the movement of the compass because it is also something concrete. And then we call this action, well, the push of the ether, and we have given the name ether or ether push or ether push. Here it begins, the physical part of this dimension begins, and then this ether push or this impulse that comes from within, since it forms 2 polar vortices that rotate in opposite directions. And through successive pulsations, they create and maintain this physical and spiritual reality, which we call concave Earth, toroid, and a basic image for the person already from the beginning in his mind. Well, conceive of this simple structure because they are, as you can see, 2 spheroids. This one on the left is a cut from pole to pole, and on the right a cut through the equator. Then 2 are perceived. Parts that are called spheroids, one concave and another convex, and the beginning is the yellow color that is inside and outside, because that is the ether or these invisible hands, which is the subtle of the most subtle. And then a more outer part, well, it's the gray part that we don't dedicate ourselves to now, but that is the crust, and especially negatively the infradimensional crust, from which precisely this attack of darkness comes. But we leave that part for now. So this is this reality that is the CONCAVE TOROIDE Earth, because where would it come from? Which one would it be? And what would that really be? Well, it would consist of creation. It would consist of the manifestation of a creative source that we can call it, because this is important, that what we want to say, because many establish a form as if the form or a void, as if it had no consciousness, because we say it is the manifestation of a creative source that we can call the consciousness of all consciousnesses. Of course, yes, something totally conscious, not something inert as some believe. And this consciousness, because it is what creates space and creates time, but it is not subject to space and time. And we can also represent this basic model as a universal toroid. That is why we have also called it a concave earth, a toroid, a universal toroid that is replicated in successive and multiple secondary toroids that constitute all manifested reality, because all manifested reality, since they would be in their essential part, the simpler they would be toroids. And so every torus preserves and has been formed by a basic scheme that we have been sharing for a long time, the basic scheme of the two vortices, poles, and the creative center. And in that creative center, it is where the source pulses, and it is where the ether is projected, which would be the invisible hands of this source for so much. Well, since there are two vortices, well, it is a duality, but a duality sustained by the triunity, because it has to be also evidently, well, that third factor that is usually invisible or imperceptible by the senses, because it is the subtle of the subtle. Therefore, we also have to highlight that this push comes from inside out. The source creates from inside out, and that emission can be considered the push of letters, and sometimes we have represented it in a way as a kind of metaphor. A balloon, when you inflate the balloon, because you actually project, you are projecting a force outward, and it gives that consistency and this push of this inner ether, because it is the one that performs the function of what we call false gravity. It's the ether that pushes us. Here too, it projects us towards the ground. Then this push ether is also identified with the magnetic currents of electromagnetism, and that we consider, as we have said, the invisible hands of the source that create, sustain, and order, and the word orders. It is important because in the end this attack of darkness will be ordered, and this darkness will be sent more outward. Obviously, that's what we are, we firmly believe. So these hands are the ones that order the entirety of manifestation, and through successive steps, this triunitary scheme of two vortices, poles, and that center, since it is the one that forms our reality through a duality that we call balance. Therefore, everything manifested here has to be dual, because duality is like a balance. It creates a balance and a complementary balance between poles. That would be the men's polo and the other polo, feminine, but at the level that we can say cosmic material, since this balance is reflected in pairs of spheroids by in the different toroids, a concave spheroid and another convex spheroid. And here you have this image. The interior, the innermost, would be the convex sky, and the blue, since it would be the concave we tread on as the ground we tread on. And then this first duality would be formed by a spheroid, as we just said, concave, which would be the feminine pole that we experience on the ground that we step on, and a convex spheroid, which would be the masculine pole that we experience when we look up and look vertically at the sky. Here they would be represented in the form of a diagram, and we in reality, because when we look and we are on the beach, for example, because the entire part of the Earth's surface that we are stepping on would be the esferoso, the concave ground, and the entire upper part from this horizon line, because it would be the spheroid that we perceive as a spheroid, convex, cielo, and the horizon line that we perceive it. We have to perceive the straight line, but it does not mean that everything is straight, but as we already said, it is a concavity that we step on, since it is the line of tension that balances these two electromagnetic tensions. Therefore, it is a vision, optical and balancing that of the horizon. So it is very important that we also say why the person, when at first he hears about this theory, he pulls back, because his mind is full of this entire universe of bodies similar to infinite terrestrial ones. But we say the matter that constitutes the convex spheroid ground is more subtle energetically than the matter of the concave spheroid ground. And we can qualify it as plasmatic, semi-etheric, or etheric matter. So all these subjects would be in the inner part, but with a much higher level. We can say vibratory and more energy, as evidently occurs in all fractals, as in the same human organism, as in the spinal cord, for example. There it is, although it seems that that spinal cord is smaller than the physical organism that contains it or the vertebral column. But they are two realities, different and complementary. And it's on the inside and not on the outside. And therefore, that is why we say that they are all moon stars, since they are not really bodies like the terrestrial ones, but with that scheme that they have given us, because they tell us, according to our opinion, everything is investigated completely in reverse. So sun, moon, stars, planets, etc. are not physical bodies like terrestrial ones. And therefore, it is better to classify them as energetic luminosities or energies of a different vibration from the elements of the concave spheroid, which is ours, which is the ground on which we step. They are different and are in the inner part, but that does not mean that they are actually smaller, because they are more subtle, and therefore their energy is projected beyond even physics, just like our etheric part. Our steric part that is born in our heart, and in that concavity we can say, but it is projected throughout the exterior of the physical body. And this must then be understood in coherence with this basic scheme of the two vortices, poles that we have here, creatives that rotate in opposite directions. Therefore the concave spheroid and the convex spheroid, since they also rotate in opposite directions. The convex spheroid sky, in the sense that we have here of Strodgerus, and our spheroid that we step on, which would be in blue, since on the contrary, in a levorotatory sense, because this is how creation is projected from the beginning. And these two opposite movements of these two spheroids, since they originate the whole phenomenology of succession of days and nights and of seasons and possible cycles. Cosmic, no more and no less. So from and within that first duality, which is the concave spheroid and the convex spheroid, successive toroidal dualities will be established in this concrete reality. Successive toroidal dualities, like all the elements we observe here. So this whole manifestation is structured in toroidal dualities, that is toroids within toroids. That's why this image of the Russian Matryoshka dolls that are there. All contained one within another. Well, it is let's say it is a fractal, or it is a way of representing that all reality from the initial toroid, since they are toroids within toroids, and they also have to be pairs of spheroids. That is, they would be pairs of dolls, one male type doll and one female type doll, or one concave and one convex. That's our whole reality. That is why we say that the source creates in the same way and in the simplest and deepest way. So we also highlight among all these toroids, some that you will already see in our series more closely of these 100 videos. Well, those that in the convex sky spheroid influence us the most, which we can say would be the sun-moon toroid, which is a toroid. The moon and the sun and the toroid that we see at night of the stars, which would be the toroid Polaris, with center more or less in Polaris and in Sigma Octantis. In the other toroids, we highlight those two toroids. Simply then, we are going to end up here saying in this fast co-opulation that we consider that the CONCAVE TOROIDE EARTH model is the simplest, deepest, and truest, and its scheme that is a triple scheme, as you will already know, a scheme that starts from the subtle interior, since we observe this scheme in all living forms, even in mineral forms. In our reality, we observe it in all those forms we have. Here in the animal cell, because here this more subtle external impulse, because it is where the force is produced, the creation of the cell takes place, and the creation of all animal life, all vegetable life and cosmic life takes place. Actually, for them to see what everything is. It is a coherent and consistent scheme, which is why we consider it the simplest yet most profound model. Based on our research, we believe it to be the truest, although we do not claim to possess absolute truth. Here, owners and we consider ourselves to be approaching it. Therefore, we end here saying that if someone refutes this model that we present of the concave toroid Earth, and refutes it not just happily with a disqualifying phrase, but refutes it with consistent arguments or evidence, well then we appreciate that, And if someone, on the contrary, it enriches it, and that is what we hope. If someone enriches them with this model, because this model that we present is simply the basic part, because it has a lot to complete, well, if it enriches them, well, we also appreciate it. And why would that be? Because we are simply moved by the closest approach to the truth. We end up wishing for ourselves and for everyone discernment, health. We need strength in this time of pervasive darkness as the century draws to a close. Greetings! We titled this video Cosmos Earth Toroid Brief Description to Cosmos Earth Toroid number 106. We made this video on May 14th, 2021 in a critical situation which we can say is important. Have an attitude of urgency, that is of releasing videos that we consider important for discernment, because we do not know how long they may be available. That is why we too are simplifying and consider this situation to be an opportunity in two senses, a general opportunity for a large part of people who have not lost common sense or discernment, then learn and see what has always been hidden, because the truth is the only thing that can make us free. That phrase, if we consider it correct, and also we in relation to this opportunity, well, we want in these final videos, which would be about 4 or 5, well, to make a summary that gives an idea. General, because since there are more than 100 videos, well, the person could get lost. Then we recommend that the person who begins to listen well this theory, or even recommend above all, well, these last videos in which we are making a simplified summary, and we also want in relation to the word opportunity, well, give opportunity to English-speaking people, as we know that there are also groups that are adhered, or there are more. We can thus say more consistent with this theory, which is the theory of the concave Earth. That's why we are also in these last 4 or 5 videos that we make a summary, we also put a translation using an automatic translator that could facilitate English-speaking people. Because having this idea of these videos, well, of course, we think that each one, well, could then advance in their understanding of this reality. We, in relation to this specific video, have to say what we intend to do. Well, about 3 or 4 fundamental points. We want to highlight topics, and especially related to dynamics with movement, which is somewhat more complicated to understand. So that's about 3 points. And above all too, because we are going to develop the third, especially in the following video, we want to highlight the following ideas or topics. First idea, that creation really consists of a separation. The source separates a part of itself by impulses or pulses, which we call pulses, and that all these pulses are established in dual mode. That is why we are going to talk about the first and the second. Pulse, all these are, can we say so, a summary, people? Well, let them be following these videos. Well, simply, this will be a compilation that they must understand. Why we have to make precisely this compilation? To facilitate, to facilitate an initial understanding. And another topic that we want to develop is that, and continuing with ideas already previously exposed, is that the impulses have to be dual and are pulsations, and that consist of opposite and simultaneous turns that are concretized in spheroids, vortices, poles that depart and converge in a source center, that is, they depart from the source and return to the source, and that we cannot directly perceive the simultaneity of these two movements. We cannot perceive it directly, but indirectly we can reach their understanding. And the third topical point, because we are going to develop it in the following video, so that the person really understands why we cannot perceive that, for example, our spheroid that we step on, Earth or concavity, because it also moves at the same time that it is moving. Seeing the sky spheroid, we do have more constancy because we see the sun making a movement from east to west, but the movement precisely of the concavity. Or our land that we step on so that they understand us. Well, we cannot perceive these two movements directly, and we will develop that especially in the next video. So we are going to move quickly because this is simply a reminder, but we consider it important. Above all, to begin, so that the person who begins, well, in this series we have to say that talking about the impulse or the initial pulsation, that creative, that as we just said, the source that may be is represented by this circle. Well, the source creates by separating from itself, well, a part of itself forming two vortices and this separation makes a movement from inside outward at the same time that it creates the two vortices by which we also have here. Well, it itself modifies because, so this darker color, we see that it has also been modified. That is why we are participants. We are really participants with this creative source. And that is the first movement, because we are analyzing the movements. And in that first movement, if it were understood well, we have exposed it in videos of a series secret secretorum 3 origin. GSP01 is one of them, because it is very important, and we want the person if he does not understand. Well, what we say here is what we are exposing, because it will really be able to achieve a more complete understanding. Then see and understand that one pole and everything is created in duality one at the expense of the other, and that we have exposed in relation to the aspect of density or subtlety in quotes, so that we have exposed it here to give a representation that this initially we will see that all these points in an initial source would be totally balanced, but if she performs precisely a condensation of a series of her points to perform this, which we call the first creation, well, that condensation, as you are seeing here in the points that have joined and have put more points of each other in blue, well, parallel and simultaneously, well, they have created precisely a more subtle space. The dense blue has created a more subtle space in such a way that that movement create those two poles, but one at the expense of the other, totally dependent. For this very reason, we can say what masculine we can represent here by this greater condensation, since it is created from or in or at the expense of the feminine, and they are inseparable. Whoever understands this then will really understand the essence of the question of creative mechanics. So, we also want you to see on this same sheet or slide that even though they are one at the expense of the other, they are not exactly the same, because here we have that same movement. From a center, the men's pole and the women's pole are created, but note that everything is one at the expense of the other, even in movements. The stropile movement, because it has to be the other left-handed movement. And notice that even the physical form is greater, we can say, or more comprehensive. The feminine, because the masculine has come out of it, has been separated. That is precisely why, for example, lately, well, the elite, well, tells us that the Earth is pear-shaped, that is, that it is wider at the bottom, and they're not wrong, because at the same time, if you check on what are called Star Trek trails, And you'll see that the circle or pole that forms around Polaris, well, it's more defined and it's smaller in that definition than the pole that's forming around Sigma Octantis, which is larger. And that's precisely why we're seeing here the women's pole is, shall we say, more encompassing. Because polo is masculine. Because the male pole has been separated from the female pole. And this is also verified for concrete and physical effects in the apparatus, in the sexual or genital apparatus of women and men. The woman's genital apparatus, well, envelops. When there is a union, it envelops. The masculine, therefore, is more inclusive, we can say, but the two are totally made inseparable and one at the expense of the other. See that everything agrees in this reality, and we come to really understand from how great the cosmos is to details like these, that we are then speaking from that central axis, since the source emits these two poles and emits them also, and we now use the word ether, which would be like hands, visible from the source. That is why the ether is the most useful of the useful, and that is why we have placed it here in empty space, which is the root of which those two poles are formed. Therefore, from that center is where the emission of the ether and the consequent emission of the two polar vortices are formed. And a word that we use to speak to give category and differentiate the concept of ether that we handle from the normal concept that is used of ether. Well, what we consider that they are electromagnetic forces, which we also define as the invisible hands of the source, and that although we cannot perceive it directly, but indirectly, yes, for example, the compass with its movement, since it is simply following the magnetic lines of the ether, just like in magnets. The wall of blocks, therefore, is the one that is projecting the two poles on the Earth, and these would be forces. Magnetic forces really registered on the Earth, since it is the ether that is conditioning, as in the human being, its etheric part. And notice that it is called etheric. It comes from ether, since it is what makes this creation and sustains it. So that they can see how the concepts we use. So how can it be synthesized? Well, this model, well, it is a model that is dual, because you are already seeing that from the beginning here a polar duality is formed, but also a triunity, because it also has the central axis, which is the most imperceptible. Therefore, it is a duality, but framed in a triunity. And we also see that in the flower of life, a duality, because they are 3 and 3. Therefore, a quality, but also the 3 as you are seeing, and in each one of even its petals, since it also has the 3, because the 3, which is the part of the central axis, has to be in everything. So these vortices, we are going to go from the spool vortices to the most specific form, these two spool vortices, since they are originated by opposite and simultaneous movements, and they themselves in turn originate opposite and simultaneous movements. And what tours will they actually make in what are pulsations? Well, routes away from the center and approaching the center, and that is round trip. And they are establishing that, as we will see the pulsations then. These movements of the polar vortices, since they would be produced by what we have just said, pulsations or impulses or pulses that are produced by an axis, a central axis, and as we already said, they are 2 at 2, especially because everything goes in duality. So for example, in the solar route, in the daily route, because we will have the pulse at dawn, one pulse and another at dusk, and in our own heart temple, because it will have. We also want, therefore, pulsations, as we will see, because the heartbeat consists of 2 types of pulsations. Those of the, we can say this about relaxation or dilation, which is diastole, and the contraction, which is systole. Precisely and all from the duality of the polar vortices, which is the first creative movement. Everything is coherent in this theory. So the pulsations, well, they transform these polar vortices that we have here, well, through a series of pulsations or steps like we have here. And the pattern of the basic steps is that of the flower of life, which are 6 steps that also tell us and speak to us in the ancient scriptures. And they are right about that the world was created in 6 days, which would be equivalent to the 6 petals that we have here of the flower of life. Well, through steps, well, these 2 polar vortices reach the first structure, which would be the structure of 2 spheroids, one convex sky and another concave ground, which is the one we really step on. But in this same creation, because this same polar disposition continues to exist, because both in the 2 spheroids, because there is the polarization that we have here in this first creative moment. And then, therefore, this model 2 polar spheroids, because one of them would be the female spheroid, which would be the blue concave ground that we step on, and the male spheroid, which would be the convex one, which is the sky that we see in the vertical that comes from this first polar step. Everything is simply the same through a series of transformations, but it is always the same pattern. The source always creates in the same way, in the simplest and most economical way. And people should come to the understanding that this is the system really at the same time as deeper, since simpler and truer and more understanding. And that makes us see this whole reality. And where can we see these spheroids reflected in our daily lives? Well, simply here, in any landscape on the edge of the beach. We have already seen it in other videos. The concave spheroid, since it would be the ground we step on. In the sand and the spheroid with weight, because it would be the sky we see. And in the middle is this line. That line is the horizon line. And what would the horizon be? Well, the horizon would be a plane of electromagnetic and visual equilibrium that forms the central axis and the 2 pore spheroids. That is, it is not where those electromagnetic forces are balanced, since this plane that is formed. Visual, that is that of the horizon, but we say, but it is not. It is not that the Earth, as we are seeing here, is flat, far from concave, but really when these 2 forces exist, well, here at this central point is where they form this plane. But it's a visual plane, and it's not the real plane. And this is where the flat earthers are very wrong. They are very wrong, really, because they have simply from a vision. Well, let us believe that everything is flat. Well, by no means. There must always be 2 vortices, and that is the plane of balance. Therefore, these spheroids have already been created here because they continue the movement, the initial movement, because they continuing it, because as you are seeing here, this line, because in one movement it goes the same as here, they are in opposite movements, one of strophiles and another the same spheroids when they have already been formed. Since one is the sky, we can say the spheroid, convex sky, since it is Trogyro movement, and the ground we step on, since it is Levorgyro movement, the opposite, as you are seeing here, simply one in favor, following the same arrangement of the hands of the clock, which is the central, the male, and the other, the female. Well, the opposite, and one appearing, that we see the Sorpol appear, and the east and moving west in the sky spheroid, well, ours is also moving, but in the opposite direction, our movement would go then in reverse, from west to east, really, although we don't see that. And in the next video, we are going to see why not. We do not perceive it our own movement, but each person, if he uses his discernment, will be able to understand it in a simple way. So now we are going to see here. These movements, but in 2 visions, a vision that we call succession, that is, we seeing only the movement that occurs in one of the spheroids, that is the most normal thing, and that is experiential, and that is what we say vision, succession, so that you understand the simplicity of this model. But the next view, which is the 2 spheroids moving simultaneously, wouldn't be the succession view, it would be the simultaneity edition, and we're going to see that below. But now we're interested in first seeing this one, which is the simplest, because we can simply see. We see it simply by seeing the movement of the sun or the succession of days and nights. Here would be the first and second pulses. So simply first beat at 6 mod in the morning, the sun begins to rise, arrives at 12 and begins to descend until 18, and at 18 there is the second beat. And then in the second pulse, well, if this has been a diastole, because it is, we can say, a dilation, the light dilates, well, the next pulse from 6:01 p.m., well, then the night comes, as we are seeing here at 24 o'clock, then 1 at 2:03 a.m. until reaching 6 o'clock again. And then here we have duality and succession, because this is a movement that we perceive in succession. But this would be the vision from a single hemisphere, only taking one hemisphere, well, here. And in one hemisphere, we would obviously have day and then night would come for us. So in this solar path, the first pulse would occur at 6:01 a.m. and the second pulse at 6:01 p.m. And the first pulse we call dawn, and the second we call sunset. And here we put it so that you can see a continuity, because this would be the continuity of days and nights. We can also tell the diastole day, taking it into account. An inconsistency with the heart diastole or day. And then what would come? Well, systole or night would come. This would be a 24-hour day. And the next day, well, it would be the same day and night simply. And so this would be the movement of succession that we believe has no difficulty in understanding. But more difficult to understand is when you already consider the two spheroids moving, that is the Earth moving and the sky moving, these two spheroids. So this is more difficult, something much more difficult to conceive and to represent, and that's a difficulty. But the important thing is that it comes to understanding, because then, as we already know, we are going to see here, taking that simultaneity, which is the same thing that occurs, as we have seen in the first initial creation, how simultaneously the masculine and the feminine are created. The dense is created at the expense of the subtle, and the subtle at the expense of the dense. Well, this is the same thing that we appreciate here when we take into account, well, the two hemispheres of the spheroid, the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. So at 6 we are going to follow the red line of our northern hemisphere. Then at 6 we will see the sun that begins to rise, arrives at 12 and begins to descend until 6:01 p.m. That would be our appreciation in the northern hemisphere. But what would be happening simultaneously? And here comes the word simultaneously in the southern hemisphere, because at 6 o'clock, as we see here the southern line, because instead of ascending towards the light, it would descend towards the night until reaching where, well, again, around 6 p.m. And then here, at this point, 18. Well, the two spheroids are found, and the second pulsation occurs. When the second pulse occurs, because after we have been in the day, because we begin to descend into the night, we begin to descend towards the night until midnight, until the other time dawn, and simultaneously, while in the other hemisphere it was night. Because now when we reach 6 p.m., because that in that hemisphere begins to rise, the sun begins to turn on the light and begins to turn on the day, and so on continuously, but both simultaneously. Notice really that we think this is not very difficult to understand simply, and it is the experimental manifestation that while in one hemisphere it is day, well, in the other we know that it is night. That is verifiable, that is evident, but here it is more difficult to represent that there are two. There are two hemispheres, that is, there are the two spheroids that are moving, and it should not be very difficult to understand this point that we too are moving at the same time that the sky is also moving. The concave Earth also really moves, and a coordinated movement, and a movement we can say harmonic is no. It is the 1600 kilometer that the official system tells us in the equator, not much less. It is something like the pulsations that make us live very harmonized with ourselves. And then we're going to continue to see here this issue of the two movements. So, if we consider ourselves now on a cosmic level, how is the first pulse that would be this formed? Well, on a cosmic level, firstly, there wouldn't have been a 2 of 2 steroids encounter on the first beat. Possibly the source emits here and then begins an adiastos, we can say begins to separate. A pole creating it in one sense and another in the other sense, the masculine and the feminine. And then, when a sufficient point of separation comes, well, then let go of that tension. And then what would happen? Well, by inertia, the two spheroids, the two polar vortices, well, they go again to their origin, but then when they reach their origin here, well, that's when the second pulsation occurs. And then in the second pulse, well, then every one of them, well, they really go into the opposite movement. So while we've seen here what this would be, well, this movement of a spheroid to the sun, we can say luminosity. Well, now, here, when the second pulse occurs, well then, notice that the red begins to go down, begins to walk towards the night, and simultaneously, while in the first, which would not be pulsation, it would be, we can also call it pulsation, the first pulse. Well, in the feminine that is arriving and is putting in the feminine part of, we can say like that at night. Well, when the second pulsation comes, well, then he is the one who ascends during the day. What we have seen previously is simply similar, but we have wanted here, talking about diastole and systole, we have wanted to represent. It is to tell that when it is created at the beginning, well, at the beginning it is not that it is formed, that the two come to join. In the second pulse, the two do come to unite again with their center, and then that is when they press. But in the first, and this would be the cosmic creation in the first diastole, we can say, because it is an initial separation. That's why, because on a cosmic level, it's something different. It's something different on a cosmic level, the first and second pulses. Because as you will see, but it is really exactly the same thing that we have been taking that is occurring in this entire scheme of this model. So we have seen that when we reach the second pulse, it is because the male pole is going to join. Or the convex spheroid with the sky spheroid, or the male pole with the female pole. And then at that moment, well, that's when the second pulse occurs. And now comes an important question, so that you understand precisely the purpose of the pulsations and what creation really consists of, which we have said is a separation from the beginning. So this question that everyone asks, what would happen if the second pulse does not occur? What would happen? Well, simply, if the second pulsation does not occur, then creation would be subsumed into the original source. That is, the two poles would meet with the center, and then creation would end there. Obviously, and this is important, that a person comes to understand that really creating is separating, but also keeping separate through these pulsations. This is very important and really not difficult. And it's simple. The human brain is trained to understand it. Therefore, and this is important, we have to say that life and creation is a constant tension, action of the source, that is. And this is important. Is it not that the Creator carried out His creation and His creation is already self-serving? Well, no, because creation is not something that was realized and left to its fate. It's not a thing of the past. Creation is a fact that is happening in these very moments that we are breathing. It is a fact of the present, because in the present, the source has to be maintaining this through these pulsations, this creation. And that is important to reach it, to understand it, because it also holds us responsible. Obviously, because it is supporting us in every beat of our heart. That is to say, it is being realized. It is not that creation was realized, but it is always being realized in the present, and then we are going to end here making this synthesis that we consider important for the person to reflect, and also for him to empower himself and become aware of how important the human being is. So that's why, continuing with this thought, we say that God did not create, but God is creating. When we say God, you can call Him source or in any other way, but let them understand us. But God is creating. It is not that He believes, but God is creating and is ordering and separating. Because every beat is a judgment. Each beat is a trial in which a balance and dimensional readjustment occurs. And this is very important that we take into account. Now, especially at this very moment. For this very reason, sooner or later, God will place each being in the place that corresponds to him? Evidently, because that is really his function, and it is the function of creation. It's not a static thing there at all, a movement at all. It's not precisely for this. God will place each being and also look in relation to human people who are losing control of their interior. He will place each one in the place that corresponds to him. But we really cannot, nor does God, put the patch before the wound. Therefore, we must also allow that this wound is occurring, which is current, but up to a certain limit. We know that it will be allowed. Obviously then too, if we really understand the necessity of free will, if we understand its necessity, then we will also understand that this universe is the best of all possible universes. If we understand the need for the universe, because a person with a simple thought, well, he can say, well, everything is wrong. Everything is wrong, but if you take into account the question that it is essential that free will exist, then you will realize that we cannot improve this universe. We couldn't improve it. We couldn't improve. We end here wishing strength for all in this onslaught of this final darkness. Greetings. We titled this video, Cosmos Earth Toroid Brief Description. 3 Cosmos Earth Toroid number 107. We make this video on May 17th, 2021, in a situation that we can describe as a crisis. And this video is going to be in relation to the movements, the possible movements of the Earth that we have been sharing for some time, that we only directly appreciate a movement that we qualify as a movement of succession, but that movement of succession is supported and really created by a movement which is the initial movement of the source, which is a simultaneous movement, and we call it movement simultaneity, but in a direct way. We cannot appreciate it, and in relation to our context, on this date, on this day, that we have already been saying for some time that it is happening. An attack or a trial also parallel to the darkness. And speaking of movements, we have to say that from the beginning, creation is really a separation from the source, and that separation, because it continues as well. It also continues through readjustments that we call dimensional readjustments. Therefore, at the present moment, at a social level, at a human level, we are convinced that this movement is also taking place, a movement of separation from human separation. Because this human separation, well, in view of a critical situation that within the negative has positive aspects that make many people see and discover this reality. This very cruel reality, obviously, but it has the positive part that the truth is discovered, and then this produces a separation between humans themselves. Is it already occurring in our lives and in our family environment? We already know that, although apparently they seem to continue. The situation in the same way, but it is no longer the same, nor will it be the same. Then an upcoming dimensional readjustment, since it will separate some and others, will separate us from human groups. That is really what we think, and we are very convinced. So in relation to this video that we are going to develop, as we already say, we are going to deal with the issue of movements, because we consider this to be perhaps a more difficult aspect, but not an important one, because we also want to say that our conception, as far as we know, is unique so far. In other words, we know that yes, that groups that are also realized, that is related to the elite, know the truth. Obviously, we believe in the true shape of this earth and its movements, but it is not exposed anywhere. We didn't find it. At least if someone does, then let us know. So find these statements that we are going to tell you here at the outset, that we affirm that the earth moves. and that the sun also moves, and no theory tells us that. They tell us one thing or the other, but not both simultaneously, and we affirm that our cosmos, Earth, torus model, and in reality, well, these two movements exist. Two movements that are opposite and that occur simultaneously in that the Earth moves and the sun also moves. And when we say the sun is representative at this time of everything from the other steroid of the convex spheroid sky, while the Earth, well, would really be, we give this name so that we can understand it, but we are referring not to the Earth of the official system, but to the concave ground, the concave spheroid that we step on. That's why we say that the ground concave spheroid moves. Does the sky move and the convex spheroid? Well, it also moves, but that we cannot appreciate this double movement, that we give it the name of simultaneity. And in this specific video, we are going to give reasons why we cannot appreciate this movement of the Earth, that is of the concave spheroid, simultaneous with the other spheroid. We are going to give reasons and an indication of what this movement is real. And in another following video, we are going to continue giving at least two other clues. That it is true and it is real, because it is the most explanatory of the existence of this movement that we have already been sharing for some time, which is the initial movement that the source simply acts in the same way. Initial movement consisted of that, of separating itself from itself and separating a polarity, positive pole, and for the masculine, but simultaneously, because that is the same movement that we believe, we are convinced, and that gives the entire explanation of this. And of this cosmos and of all phenomenology, two movements and not a single movement. So we're going to be repetitive. We know that many people will already know this video well, because we also want to put, well, we can say the subtitles here in English, in case it can be useful to someone who we know is there. There are also groups of concave Earth, but something different from ours. So we say that we find in our research this Gordian knot, the Gordian knot of the two movements, because we have been affirming for some time that there are two opposite turns that are produced by a central axis, but instead we observe, and anyone is observed, since that the only thing we see is a single movement, either of the sun or the stars in a single direction. Then, so if we verify that the sun, for example, the asteroid sun, rotates in a single direction, and we say at the same time that the pulsation consists of two opposite turns, then the question would be, where is the opposite turn to the sun? Where's that turn opposite the sun? Yeah, for that explanation comes this video. And then that explanation, well, made us fit into many pieces, well, into this one. What a model, because we have been exposing here for some time the two movements, one of the sky spheroid in the strophilic sense that you are seeing here, and another one of ours that we stepped on in the livophilic sense, that is opposite. This is what we have been exposing for a long time. We say and said that it is simultaneously, but we only see a movement of the tensor really. So that is why we say that we can only perceive that movement directly in the succession of a single spheroid, and not this other one but this other one is the most important, which is that of the simultaneity of the two movements, because we will all already know that we only see the sun moving and originating day and night, and that is why we think by seeing things like they tell us what the Earth is, the only one that moves, or what the sun is, but they have never told us that they are the two who move. So we continue to affirm that we can only perceive succession and not simultaneity, because even in our own physical organism, which is precisely that coherent with this whole model, or rather the whole cosmic model, is coherent with the model of the human body and the human heart, because that is the purpose of the source of the human being and the consciousness of the human being. Because even in the human being we cannot simply appreciate, because, for example, in the heartbeat we do not take the pulsations. And we check at least 60 beats or 70 beats per minute, 80, etc. That is a succession. But we do not check that in each of those pulsations, since there is a simultaneous movement. We didn't check that. And that is what we dedicate ourselves to, that precisely that simultaneous movement is what gives rise to that succession. That is, simultaneity is what gives rise to succession. And we, as we already see, only see the sun that rises in the east and sets in the west. That is the succession that we observe in the convex spheroid that is represented in this case by the sun. But we don't perceive this simultaneity that we're presenting here of in a left-handed turn, the one in blue, the spheroid we're stepping on, and an opposite strophilic turn of the convex spheroid. We don't appreciate that, but we say that's what underpins all this creation and those two. These two movements then are incardinated and produced by a central axis, because everything has to revolve around the creative center or around the source or whatever they want to call it, or around the creator, as each one wants to say and define it. So we are going to give 33 reasons or 3 causes why it is not perceived. First, the movement of the earth that we do not notice, and also this double movement. We are going to give 3 causes, and we already say the first. Why don't we perceive the movement of the earth? Because we say that if everything moves uniformly, that is uniformly, without changes in speed, then we do not perceive this movement to be very fast or very slow. And we give the example that each person can experience. For example, riding on a train. If it will only perceive when there is a change of speed, or when starting or stopping, that we are going forward or backward. There, yes, but the movement, when it is already underway, if it maintains a speed, whether it is slow or fast, if it is uniform, we don't really perceive it. We don't perceive that we are moving it, and that's it. Goal. And that is true, because we have verified that many other researchers, when they have discovered, for example, flat earthers, that what they tell us is false, because they have come to deny that if we do not perceive, that is, they say, if we do not perceive the movement we physically of the earth, then it does not exist. No, that's not the case, because we were told, and we're all indoctrinated, that the earth spun, and that gave rise to days and nights at 1,600 kilometers each at the equator. But they gave us the explanation, which is coherent. The explanation is coherent. Another thing is whether or not that movement is true, that if everything moves, we are not aware of that movement, and everything and all people consider it correct. Until a few years ago, we started to confront this system with reality and logically that question that if everything moves or at the same time, well, you do not perceive the movement. That's right. Another thing is whether it is true or not, but that explanation is correct. If everything moves uniformly, then that's why we don't perceive the movement of the earth. That's the first explanation for why we don't perceive. We can't directly perceive the movement of the earth. And now, in relation to why we can no longer perceive now not only the movement of the earth in itself, but by comparing it with another movement. Which? Well, we say that this second cause would be, or explanation would be, that from the inside of a mobile spheroid, from the inside, we can only perceive the movement of another spheroid, this static, that spheroid, that is, it is still, or this mobile. Because if there are no more reference points, we cannot perceive two movements. And that is why we are saying that we cannot perceive simultaneity, that they are two movements, because if we are here, we see, for example, a train. We are this moving train, because we are this moving train. If we look out the window, we will see that maybe it will move, moving, because this little house that is here. And it could well be that she was moving and we were still, or the other way around, one thing or the other, but we could never perceive. Two movements, if there are those two movements, and that's the same thing that happens here on Earth. If we are here, then inside, from the inside, that is forming part of the movement, then we will not be able to appreciate the two, because we are part of one of them. If there is no other reference point, we can only perceive a movement, then we can't. That's why we can't perceive simultaneity, because we are part of one of the spheroids. If we are here, for example, if we were still, then we would see this movement, which is what is perceived from the sun moving. But if we were also in motion, since we simply could not perceive ours either, we would only perceive that movement. This is the explanation, because we are part of one of the movements. We are part of the concave spheroid that we have here. We say that it moves unlike cellular Earth, and that is why we cannot perceive the two movements, we can only perceive one. Thus, for example, we in our reality only perceive the succession or day or night. We cannot simultaneously perceive what it is that it is day and it is night, because it is the succession. But what we are saying is that this movement is due to a simultaneous movement, and that is the novelty, or what is different from all the other theories, because the other theories, they show us a single movement. The officer tells us the only one that moves is the Earth rotating the Sun at that moment. In relation to it, it is still, that is, it tells us that only the Earth or the theory of the flat Earth or that of the theory of the concave cellular Earth moves. They both tell us that it is the Sun that moves and that the Earth is static, but we, unlike all these, since we say they both move, the Sun or the convex spheroid moves and the Earth moves, or the concave spheroid. And that makes us different, And what we are doing is explaining that we can't sense that movement. That is, and this is the explanation for the third cause, that we cannot perceive it, because we observe it in the same way, two opposite movements. For they also produce the same visual effect as a single movement. If they are perceived from one of the mobiles, and it cannot be otherwise, we are here located on one of the mobiles, which would be the spheroid with a ground end, and then look here so we can see that. That explanation, that if you see here that two trains, two circuits, one, we are going to assume this one going in the direction of east, we are going to put it from west to east. And this other one, notice that it goes in the opposite direction because it has the locomotive placed in the front. That is, this other one would go in the direction like the Sun spheroid, that is in the direction of Strophel, just like the hands of the clock would go in that direction, and ours would go in the other direction. Well then, if our spheroid is still, here we look out the window, we see the other movement, because we will see the movement that goes from right to left. That's simple, but if we are also moving, and think about it and look at the diagram, because we would perceive exactly the same thing. We would perceive that the Sun appears on our right, the spheroid, the Sun from east to west, and sets in the west in the same way. That is, the same thing is seen with a movement. Then with two movements, because we can only appreciate a single movement. And so these are the three Osage causes and reasons why we can't really appreciate simultaneity. So that's why we say that a static Earth and a Sun moving from east to west, because it produces the same subjective visual effect as an Earth moving from west to east. And a Sun moving from east to west, that is the Earth moving from west to east, that is the opposite of the Sun, because the Sun always moves from east to west. Well then the subjective visual effect is the same really, and it is of a single movement, it is not of two movements. So this is the reason, or the three explanatory causes of that we don't perceive the two movements. That's why we believe that because of the indoctrination I have received, we think and we believe. Most of humans believe that the Earth is the only one that moves, as the official system tells us, or the opposite, that the Sun is the only one that moves. But none that we know of, because they tell us that it is not so, that they are the two who really move, and that is the most explanatory thing. So that is why we say that in reality and in the cosmos, Earth torus model, it is the two spheroids that move, and in an opposite and complementary way. And that is the same simultaneously as those who have been telling us what they have been telling us from the beginning. We, in this model, that from the beginning are two opposite and complementary movements, male polo and female polo. So why both the two steroids move and for specific cosmic or cosmological effects? Well, it's because they follow the same initial pattern that we've put here on the left, the central axis, producing two movements, simply because everything is same thing. That's why we say that, although it seems more difficult, our model is really the easiest, because the same thing always repeats itself. Two vortices, poles of opposite and simultaneous turns that are created and produced and maintained by a central axis or by the source or by the creator. So simple duality and triuni. And we are going to keep them seeing this dia. Let's give a hint that this is true. And why aside, in the next video, we will give 2 more indications that this is a real movement. And what would that hint be? Well, that is the indication that all life, all life, because it is produced by this opposite movement that we are going to see here, now in the heart and in the double circuit. Also that everything is repetitive. A circuit that goes in the opposite direction to the other, which is the circuit in the human being himself, arterial blood circuit and venous blood circuit. Let's use the metaphor so that we can be more understanding of a cell that, as we already know, all the cells in our body are feeding, and vetoed by blood, because blood carries life and carries ether in oxygen, and it's a gas more than a liquid. Blood really is. And then let's imagine a cell here in one of these arteries placed, that it well receives its permanent and daily nourishment from that blood, from that circuit. Then only this cell will only perceive the succession of the bloodstream, just as the human being only perceives the succession of the sun. So that they see that everything is similar, she will ignore, since there is also simultaneity, because then the cell ignores that there is a parallel circuit, that here we have the 2 circuits, which is contrary to the circuit that brings them food. It is contrary to the arterial blood circuit, because one is to bring life and another is to carry away the waste. And the venous circuit is the cell, because it will ignore that. It will believe that only this circuit comes bringing it daily its food, just as we see daily the sun giving, creating the day that precisely produces temporal succession and life for us, and then the cell, because it will also ignore it. Well, the fundamental basis than that of the circuit of the 2 circuits, the blood and the venous, which is the simultaneity that occurs in the heart, because this simultaneity that occurs in the heart is what precisely originates the succession, which is the only one that it perceives, that is that of the blood circuit. Because he will not perceive precisely this simultaneity and that simultaneity. See it, analyze it, investigate it, which is that in the heartbeat, because atrial diastole is simultaneous, and here the important word is simultaneous and opposite. It's obviously simultaneous with ventricular systole. But that the human being himself, since he does not perceive it, he only perceives the succession of one pulse after another, and the cell, because it also ignores it. Therefore, here we end up saying that just as the majority human being, that is the immense majority, ignores that the earth and the sun, that is the 2, move in an opposite and complementary way, and in a harmonious way, since just as it is ignored. Well, the cell is the same thing that would happen to that cell with that ignorance, since it is what happens to the majority of human beings who only believe that either the earth or the sun moves. But now the time has come. In this discovery, already in this final epoch, that someone or some of us investigate and see that really everything goes in harmony and everything goes in a duality, and a duality of opposition, of opposite but complementary movements, totally complementary, just as man and woman are complementary to each other. We end up wishing for ourselves and for everyone strength in this final attack of this darkness. Greetings to all. This video, Cosmos Earth Toroid Description, Brief 4. Cosmos Earth Toroid number 108 was made on May 20th, 2021, during a dark period. We discussed the movement involving 2 simultaneous movements of 2 spheroids that create this entire reality, and precisely electromagnetism is really the one that acts creating 2 poles, and from there everything is created. but we have to make the essential difference, and we say essential. In what is natural electromagnetism, of what is artificial electromagnetism, the artificial is, like all technology, created for the vampirization and enslavement of the human being. And precisely in this current attack, because what would it be then? The action of a satanic type darkness which knows everything to influence precisely the dimensional center that is the human being, since it would be affecting electromagnetism, affecting natural electromagnetism. So how would this be done? Well, those who are following our videos will already know that precisely the source and the most powerful thing is the most subtle thing, therefore. Nanotechnology, which is precisely the size reduced to the maximum, we can say, and therefore will approach this concept of natural of the subtle, since through that technology and using and copying the source through artificial electromagnetism, then enslave the human being. And how would that be done practically? Well, really, arriving through this technology, through this nanometric technology, we can say, well, injecting it into the interior of the human being through his bloodstream. We can then say through this type of internal implant, since of course it would become vampirized. To the human being in the part closest to the source, but we know that it can never be reached. You can never get to the subtle of the subtle that is inside the human being, but you can get to the physical part of the human being. Therefore, it is very important to arrive. Some people will already know what we are referring to. Well, to avoid precisely that kind of dark action, because it's already really verifiable, as we're going to see, verifying that all the technology, all this technology, well, that's what it's based on. Because you simply take a little magnet and you'll see that any type of remote control like this one we have here, any control of television, well, in some parts, well, you see it is attached because everything is based on electromagnetism, but natural electromagnetism, and this is artificial, any type of mobile. This one is older generation, but in certain parts, as you will see in certain parts, since it is attached, the magnets are attached. And that's a sign, obviously, of this use of electromagnetism in vampiric technology, and all kinds of hearing aids can prove it. Look how it sticks. So this is the basis, that of creation in a natural and biological way. In a natural biological way, even the same mouse, in the same mouse of one of the computer, and put it in the computer, because you will see what remains. You will see how they see that it is adhered, and they put it on some parts of the computer that we are using, since that magnet is adhered. Therefore, this is the method of the, we can say, of the maximum technology, but made to control the human being. And now, in these days and in this current time, at this very moment that we are making this video, well, some people will already be able to know what we are getting into, Really referring, then we say, and all this electromagnetism in our model? Well, we already have everything decoded. Fortunately, those who are following these videos are lucky, because we are seeing the essence, since it is precisely electromagnetism that all types of technology are seeing. For us, it is all of a demonic type, because it also prevents the development of spiritual faculties of the human being. Well then, we can really understand that perfectly here. How do I know how to use it? But in a positive spiritual way, since the source, through these two opposite and simultaneous movements that create two poles, and that's magnetism, positive pole and negative pole, or masculine magnetism, or masculine and feminine really, but the biological is what we have to protect, especially in these essential moments that we are experiencing. So we are already making a description, a synthesis, and that is why we are going to go quickly in these videos, because people will already be able in this series that exceeds 100 videos, because they will be able to refer to more specific aspects, while we are simply making, well, a summary one. So we start from a statement. We affirm that the Earth moves and that the Sun moves, and all this in relation to our model of two opposite movements. And that's why you already have this first image here of two spheroids moving in opposite directions and inside, because it's emitting that source and it's creating this polarity. This polarity in a practical way is what we have been seeing right now, precisely applying that magnet, but the artificial, the natural. Is this really then in this video? We are going to give indications. We are going to give indications that precisely these two opposite movements. Well, this simultaneity of movements is true and is the true model, and we are also going to remember that we saw it in the previous video that precisely life, that is an indication that this movement is true, is that all life, all living beings, and in relation to them, present this type of simultaneous and opposite movement as in the heart. And we have already seen in the previous video, we are going to remember that, but we are also going to go later. From that part, that proof of life, we are going to go to an indication of the problem of the movements and the observable size of the Sun, which is going to tell us that our model, and now we are going to compare ours with the official heliocentric model. In the following video, we will compare it with the flat Earth model, wanting to highlight that our model gives a more valid and coherent explanation to certain problems that will be presented to this heliocentric official Earth and to the flat Earth. And that's why we are going to present it in this video. We are going to limit ourselves to the official heliocentric Earth to see the comparison and see that our model of these two opposite movements, well, is really the true one. That is our opinion that we want to share. So we make a reminder for people who don't know. No, I don't know from previous videos, because there is a compilation of this entire theory that there are two spheroids that start from the same center, a concave spheroid and another convex spheroid. As you will already know that these two spheroids move simultaneously and in opposite ways, as you are seeing here, the two spheroids rotating in opposite directions, our concave, which is the ground we step on, and the convex, which is the sky, and that these two, this same movement of the two spheroids, that's why we say that the Sun moves and that the Earth moves, they both move, and no one says that. That we know, because it is simply without this same initial pattern from the initial creation, this same pattern of the two opposite movements that you then create, so that you see that everything is the same scheme really. That is why we say that it is easy, and as we already say that it is one of the fundamental proofs that this is the true model. Well, all life. And your whole life, well, it follows the same model because the heart continues with this inside it. Since it is also carrying out that opposite movement of two poles, even multiplication, the cells, the life of the cells, since precisely they separate into two vortices, in two poles, they really separate to create all this life. This is a great indication that our model, because Earth couldn't. Are there people who already come to the conclusion that the Earth is a living thing? Well, very well, exactly. It is something alive and something conscious. We can say consciousness is from the source, and it cannot be. It's very logical that it follows the same pattern that life is following, because then in the heartbeat, for both of you to see the two opposite movements, atrial diastole is simultaneous with ventricular systole. So why? And that's the opposite movement. And we say that the majority human then ignore these two movements that move, that make a harmonious opposite and complementary movement. But now we want you to stop ignoring it and focus and analyze this model, and then that in relation to an indication that this model is true in relation to life. Life tells you that this follows the same model of two opposite vortices, but now we are also going to see it in relation to the phenomenology that occurs here. In this dimension of movement of the sun, for example, of the sun and of this whole reality, then we bring here this image because for us it was what cost us the most to decode and which is to check. Which does not prove that we think in a coherent way any other theory, because the sun well maintains that same size throughout its entire route, and we will see that above all. We will get into it in the next video, relationship with the flat earth, and here we are going to present problems. In this video we have talked about the heliocentric earth, that is the official earth. What problems may arise in relation to this movement and this size? Year of these stars to the official earth, since a big problem that we can say is the coincidence inequality. Of the apparent size of the sun and moon during the solar eclipses that you are seeing here that match, because really this measurement that the heliocentric theory tells us of a sun at 15,000 kilometers, and that it has a size 1,000 times larger than, for example, than the Earth, and the moon being smaller than the Earth. How is it possible that what coincidence they coincide in this eclipse? Well, this is it. This is really an explanatory problem for the official Earth that has an easy explanation in our model, obviously, as you will see then in relation to the sun. And well, we can say that the apparent size, well, during the daily solar route, as we have said, for the official heliocentric Earth, it is not a big problem. Because if it is at that great distance, well, no, we would not appreciate that difference in size. But what is a big problem is the effect of the change in temperature from day to night that is attributed to the sun. That's very problematic. Very difficult to justify on official land. And here they have the sizes of the sun, and here you can barely even see the Earth as a tiny pinhead. So this is the other problem, no longer that of eclipses, but the problem of temperature, because how would it be possible that from day to night there are sometimes even 20°? 20° difference between day and night, 20 degrees C. And then, if we scale these measurements that they tell us, we put the sun on one scale and the Earth on another scale, like we have said here on 1 millimeter, well, then we see that that has no possibility of being real, that change in temperature, because this would be the same as a ball 10 centimeters in diameter emitting whatever it was. Well, the sun emitting all the heat it wanted to emit, and a ball of 1 millimeter that we have here, that the two were about 11 m apart. So how is it possible that a small turn of this small ball make a temperature change of even 20° from day to night? With this sun that would be in this situation would be about 11 meters. At about 11 meters, that changes that much, that has no chance of being real. And if we multiply it by 10, then let's put a ball 1 meter in diameter. It is separated from a 1 centimeter ball. Take a small 1 centimeter ball and stand on this ball 110 meters away and emit the heat it emits. How? How would it be possible that you rotate the surface of this 1 centimeter ball, and then in that rotation the temperature changes 20 centimeters? That has no chance of being real in this model. It is a great handicap, however, in our model, because since it is not like that, no, it is not like that, neither those sizes nor that distance, because it is totally coherent in our model, because then in our model there would be two spheroids like we are seeing here, one and another that are close. Look, the proximity would be the line outside would be ours, and the line inside would be the sky. So they are very close to each other, and also in size and distance. So it's coherent that with a twist. Well, change 20 degrees so that they can see the incoherence of the official heliocentric model and the coherence of our model, really. And another problem that also arises with the heliocentric model is that we have already seen it in other videos, because precisely the person who observes tells us that the moon is illuminated by the sun as by a spotlight. But if you see many of the images that are captured, you see that it is not here, that it is not like that. Here's a much lower sun, we can say. And instead the lighting, this is a real photo, the lighting comes from above. So the reflection of the sun on the moon is problematic on this official heliocentric Earth, because sometimes, and quite a few times, it does not match the focus. The illumination of the moon does not match the position of the spotlight, as we are seeing here in others. In many other photos that we can find, or videos, because here this is a night photo. Well, if it is a night photo, the sun is already below the horizon, we can say, and the light reaches this moon from above. Well, therefore, where does that illumination come from? That is a handicap in the official heliocentric theory. But our model, which is a closed model like the one we are seeing here, and that the moon and the sun are two poles of a torus, well, then it is neither. No incoherence that goes elsewhere, in addition to the main one, because that would be the main approach. But in a closed system, it is very logical that there are also deviations, as we are seeing from light that can arrive from another side, as we are seeing here, because there is an enclosure then in our cosmos, Earth torus model, since it is not a handicap that on some occasions, apart from the main focus, it goes in a more direct way, also creating what they are. What are the different illuminations or lunar phases, since sometimes it also goes for another more distant circuit and in a more indirect way, because it is a closed system then. And also another problem or incoherence of the heliocentric or official model is what we call the opposite. The tide opposite the moon. We can say the tide opposite the moon, as we're seeing here in this illustration, because a lot of people won't know that. We are told that precisely the moon, its gravity, attracts water from the Earth's oceans and then tides occur. But really, we check and observe and look for it, and you will see that there is also here on the opposite side another tide, and that both are high, a high tide, both are in elevation. So what does that make sense in Newtonian gravity and in this model? Because it would be logical that we could say yes to this part because it attracts it, but this would have to be the other way around. She would have to be shrunk in any case, we might say, but she is also attracted as if there were another here. So those are details we don't fall on, but when we start to investigate thoroughly, well, we see. And although we already know that, of course, darkness always justifies everything, it will always give any explanation. But to us, to common sense, elementary, since none of these explanations that they can give us are useful. So here we have that same example, here the moon, and here it's seeing the two types of tides, we can say, or rising water of seas and oceans. And then there is also another type in the other part, the sublunar and antilunar, but either way it is here the moon is located. But then this in our model is not something crazy, because our model, precisely everything works like a heart, like a systole and a diastole. So notice that it could be alternation. How are we seeing? The alternation of systole and diastole. Really then, that's why we say that this effect of the tide opposite to the moon, well, it is a handicap according to all our opinion, research to the heliocentric system, but not to ours, because it is more. In our same model, because you will already know that there are two pulsations that we have been talking about, which could be reflected by these two types of movements, and throughout the day, consult it, because they occur high tides and low tides, 2 high tides and 2 low tides occur. That is 2 flows and 2 E-blows. Precisely since there are 2, since they would coincide with the 2 pulsations that we say by example, for example, that we also say it in another temporal aspect at dawn and at dusk, so that you can see that then our model is coherent and are easily explanatory. These are this tide opposite to the moon, but not in the heliocentric, is our opinion and in our research. And also another problem for the official heliocentric Earth is the existence of mountains. On the surface of the Earth at the equator, is this the equator? Because if the Earth is rotating at 1600 kilometers here at the equator, then how is it possible that all these types of mountains exist in these portions? How do I know how they can exist? Because if that were the case, precisely the centrifugal motion as we are seeing here would cause the water to accumulate precisely in these parts, in the part of the equator and in the other part of the poles. Well, it was the other way around, but that is not what is observed. Isn't that what you see? Therefore, we say that this is really an incoherence is the existence of lands and mountains of great elevations precisely in the equatorial zone where it is, where everything should be accumulated in water. On the other hand, in our theory of the cosmos, toroidal Earth, as we know that instead of gravity, it is an inner impulse. As we are reflecting here in a globe, well then this inner impulse, well what makes it distribute all the strata homogeneously? The genius homogeneously. Therefore, if you distribute it all the strata homogeneously, as we are even seeing here in a living fractal element that distributes all the strata to you, then it is logical that there does not exist that accumulation of water in a certain portion, but that everything is distributed very wisely, as it actually occurs. It occurs here. All the elements are separated by their densities, so we can say that they are the push of the inner ether really. So that's why we are going to end here saying that this model of the cosmos is a toroidal Earth or a toroidal concave Earth, because it is the one that gives a greater explanation and solution to problems that arise in other spatial theories such as the official Earth, and in the next video we will see in relation to the flat Earth and also with the cellular Earth. That is our opinion that we want to share, so that each person can investigate, apply their discernment, and perhaps our understanding will come, because in addition our land and our model also participates with the spiritual, not only the material but the spiritual. Because then we end up synthesizing, saying that the source, creative or the creator or whatever you want to call it, since he creates and maintains the universe through 2 movements that are simultaneous and are opposite, which are 2 poles, vertices. This is how he carries out this creation, and the heart precisely is the culmination in which we see precisely that same scheme, which is the culmination of those 2 creative movements. And why do we tell them it's the culmination? We say that it is the culmination because we believe, we are convinced that the human being is the center of this dimension, and that it is also the restoration project of a higher order that would be in union with the original source. Therefore, we want with this theory not only to facilitate the understanding of this reality, but also to empower by empowering the human being precisely and as we are seeing here at this current moment. Because if you apply your discernment and you are seeing that everything is electromagnetism, well, know that natural electromagnetism, well, it is attacked precisely by this artificial electromagnetism of all technology. We end up wishing for ourselves strength in these moments of maximum attack from the darkness. Greetings. We titled this video Cosmos Earth Torus, brief description. 5 CT. 109. We make this video on May 27, 2021 in a situation of action of darkness, and we have to remember in relation to this situation that Lucian or darkness or its servants, since they follow and imitate nature. Thus, for example, we have already seen that power cycles are established following the same movement of the sun from east to west. That's why we've seen. Then in Jonza. Would that civilization be in Mongolia, China, which is where they're taking us today? Well, he did. If we see now with perspective, the movement of the power. How has it developed here on this land? Well, we saw that from that portion located in the north, we follow the road and reach, for example, the area of Canaan to the Phoenician area of the Phoenician civilization. Then you continue following that path. Another center of power also arrives in Egypt. Then the civilizations that we already know, especially the main ones known, since they would be the Greek civilization, then the Roman one. Notice that it always goes from east to west, then it arrives in Spain, where it makes a jump, but also in Spain, since it is already projected towards the farthest north, but following the same direction from east to west to England, and from England already makes the jump, following that same direction from east to west to America, and from America because now it is returning. Notice that everything is a movement from east to west, because it is returning to where they are taking us now, precisely to the system where it is most rooted and most powerful, because the snake and the dragon are taking us, well, to the Yonsa culture. And now, currently, well, China, obviously, and that system, and then that in relation to a cycle, but in relation to 1 year, because this also allows us, when we already really know how it works, well, all this reality, well, we already know how to interpret it more correctly. For example, also at the level of 1 year, because what we have written is at the level of a cycle. Total. Well, but at the 1 year level, well, something is also repeated. Similar, for example, right now, here in Spain, well, we have to see what's going to happen soon in Spain when following that path of the sun. Well, we have now that in the other hemisphere, well, for example, in Argentina, well, they are in a winter and seeing what it is happening and how it is. Tightening the darkness, for example, in Argentina and that part of America. Well, we already know that it was winter there, and when winter comes here, well, obviously something, the like will be what is projected to happen to us, because it is always used, well, these cosmic models, the darkness with all that mastery that we can say, that gives it that knowledge of cycles and cycles. That is why they are ritualists, and that is why they have astrology established, and you have established the key dates on which these types of rituals are performed. This is in relation to the current situation and in relation to this specific video that we already have left. We believe that maybe one more video or two to finish this series that we consider to be the most important thing of all our work in videos and in communicating knowledge or sharing knowledge. Well, we have to say that in this video we are going to show how in our model, the Cosmos Earth Toroid model, well, it gives explanation and gives understanding to a problem that is faced. It presents, for example, other models such as flat Earth and is the LA. It is the next problem, the problem of how is it possible for a closer and closer sun to maintain its same size before the viewer, more or less its same size, since it appears in the east and sets in the west, because if it is smaller, and it is closer, we would have to see it when, for example, we raise the scene instead vertically. We're supposed to see him older. Just like if a helicopter, we see it in the distance and we see, is it heading our way? Well, as it gets closer, we will see that its size is increasing. That is what is considered in other models, but in the as well, he has one easy and simple explanation that we are going to share, although it can be improved, and we are aware then. In the future, however, as of now, it is explanations that are more coherent than ours. Well then, here we are. Does this video then occur? We will elaborate on it in approximately 4 parts. First, let's proceed with fast of our model. For people who do not have prior knowledge, we'll talk later. And to remember this, we are saying this problem because it is convenient. Put on. In this problem, to understand this video, obviously, and after knowing the problem, well, let's give it to him. The solution is ours. Earth in the concave Earth. The toroid henceforth will be elucidated in one specific manner. More. No. Providing a comprehensive synthesis. So, this is the video, the outline of the video that we are going to go, which we are going to go develop then, as you are seeing two images of our model, one to the left of the two spheroids. Simultaneous and opposite movements. And another to the... Henceforth, we will delve into explaining why this phenomenon transpires, ensuring that this effect remains constant irrespective of the closer proximity of the Sun than purported, with the Sun being smaller indeed. We promptly recall for individuals unfamiliar with this model that these two images comprise two spheroids. One exterior spheroid, which represents our concave region, and another interior one, representing the convex sky we observe overhead. These spheroids originate from a central point, serving as the source or the emission center, as we may aptly term it. Everyone really revolves around that center. It can't be otherwise. Everything has to rotate around the creative source, obviously, and then these two spheroids, as you're seeing here on the left by the arrows, because they rotate in opposite directions. We will be on the ground concave spheroid here in blue and looking vertically because we would see the entire sky. That would be the other spheroid, and the two move simultaneously and oppositely, opposite movements. So this is the problem that we are going to deal with, as how the apparent size of the Sun remains unchanged, and then if the Earth such as concave Earth or flat Earth, especially in relation to flat Earth, how is a Sun that is smaller and is closer? Well, how can you keep that same size? Because, for example, here in our dimension, if we see a helicopter coming in the distance, approaching us, then we would see that it is increasing in size. On the other hand, in the Sun, we see that its size always remains the same. How is this possible? Well, that's it. For us, it was a problem, and we spent a lot of time thinking about it until we really fit it. We fit it into our model because it was really easy, like everything, but really at first, well, we knew we had to explain. So this is the explanation of how it is possible that during the entire solar path, like for example here in the flat Earth model, well, yes, it is closer. Well, if you are in a part of the Earth, and you see that the Sol is getting closer to you, because you would have to see what I know is increasing in size, and instead what we see is this. No, that does not vary. But in our model, since there are two spheroids, there are two. And it is not this static part like the one presented by the flat Earth, because then it does have a place here, and it has an explanation that we are going to give it, because, for example, that explanation of the size of the Sun on the official Earth, well, it is not a problem for the official Earth, because the official Earth tells us that the Sun is 150,000 kilometers from the Earth. Then of course 150,000 from the Earth, because the Earth is rotten, since no difference in size would be noticeably seen, which we have exposed in a previous video. But what is a big problem for the official Earth is that that small turn at that distance produces even a 20 difference between day and night. Of course, it is a problem for the official Earth, but what we are dealing with here for, it is not a problem, but it is a problem for the flat Earth, and it may be a problem for our model. It could be, but it is not, as we are going to explain it here, because then the problem would be, how is it possible? In that it maintains without increasing or decreasing the size of the Sun, both at dawn and at dusk, which continues to be that same way. To give you that idea, Well, here would be the explanation or solution that the model that we share of a toroidal concave Earth gives, which would be these representations of it. Different representations of that model. We are going to go quickly, well, seeing this explanation, because then in this model, well, there are two movements, as we have already said, and we have been sharing for some time that they are simultaneous because they are two spheroids, as you are seeing here. And then in these two spheroids, well, it is true that we get this vision of a sun that apparently seems to be approaching and rising. But we say in quotes that it is getting closer because we are really going to see that it is not that it is getting closer in our model. So, but without changing the size. So, and also, along with that approach, it will be verified that the temperature is also affected. For example, normally the sun, when you have it vertically, since you have higher temperature. So we can say is that the sun is closest to us. But we say it is not because it is closer to the sun, it is due to a phenomenon of angularity and perpendicularity, that is, when it is more perpendicular to the subject, because then there it has greater influence. But it's not that the sun is closer, as we are going to expose here in this video, because we say that it does not approach the viewer, but since they are two spheroids, well, he is this sun, well, it evidently remains in its own spheroid, just as it happens to it. To the moon. And what would his spheroid be? Well, it would be the convex spheroid in this inner spheroid. That's where it would stay and it wouldn't be really getting close. And here we have the two spheroids so that you can see the separation between the two, that we have to be guided by independent experiments because we cannot believe anything that NASA tells us. And then in independent experiments, we see that a height of just over 100 kilometers is never exceeded. That's why we here have established to scale, because this model in an Earth with a radius of 6,500 kilometers and a separation between spheroids, the line, the innermost would be the convex spheroid, and the Y, the outermost, would be the concave, which is the one that we step on, and then this separation would be 200 kilometers we have established. Therefore, we say that the sun does not approach and that these two spheroids always maintain each other, since this approximate distance of 200 kilometers, and the temperature, we remember it again, since it is due to that type of angularity. For example, here we are seeing what the analemma sun is, that is the different positions of the sun in the year. Here would be the summer solstice, because then when it is at the summer solstice, it is much higher. So that angularity is what makes the temperature increase, but it is not because the sun is closer, just as we see the sun daily here posed on this spheroid, which is in blue, that this would be ours that we step on, and this would be the convex spheroid sky. Since we see it appear evidently through the convex spheroid sky, but we will have the vision at this point on the horizon, because this is a visual optical perception that this is the horizon. Is it, we can say, the line of electromagnetic tensions that are formed between the two spheroids, but we will always see it, well, appearing and rising vertically. Therefore, this verticality and this angle is what makes us increase that temperature, but it is not because it is getting closer, because it always moves that distance in that spheroid of the sky. From there, we calculate at least about 200 kilometers, and so that you now have a synthesis of this synthetic explanation, we are going to synthesize it into two effects to be able to understand that really. That phenomenon that the size of the sun does not decrease or increase. So seeing this image that we have here, we say and repeat that the sun, well, no, it doesn't move. In our spheroid, which is the concave ground, but moves in the convex sky. And then here, this image that is misleading, because we can see here they represent us two, one type of spheroid, one type of world, and another that this would be the lunar south world. Sometimes I have said, and another that it is outside, that it would be the empire or in this image. Well, then we say, it represents a truth that they are two different worlds, they are two spheroids, but both the sun and the moon and the stars are not in this one. They are outside, they are in the other spheroid. And the human being cannot cross this horizon line, he cannot physically access. And that is why we have said, since the moon cannot be reached, because you cannot leave this type of spheroid. Therefore, then there are two spheroids, and the sun moves in this spheroid, which is the sky spheroid, or convex spheroid, and then in that movement, in that spheroid, well, the number one visual effect that we say, in order to be able to understand this reality of the sun maintaining itself, is that the human being is a center of polar balance. We have been sharing this for some time because that is also personal empowerment and is a center. And then in that center, here the human being looks up at this beach and about eye level. Look, everything is coordinated because the human being. The center, well, you see this horizon line, but this horizon line that we see straight because they are a visual effect of two electromagnetic voltages. Actually, well, it's a curve because everything is curves. The Earth is a spheroid. It's a spheroid. The concave ground is a curved spheroid, evidently, and the convex one too. So this would be the actual line of the sky spheroid. Convex. And this would be the line of the spheroid with a ground end, and then in the electromagnetic tension at this central point between the two, since that is where the human being is as a center of polar balance, and this is extremely important to conceive of. And precisely for that reason, because this phenomenon occurs, which is the phenomenon of the ascending horizon, because we see here that a person ascends on a pole, and at the same time, the horizon grows and rises with it anyway. If you ride in a balloon, you begin to rise the balloon, but you always see the horizon which rises with you. And that's what gives you another important indication, very important, that the human being is a center. It is there in that polar balance. And that is why the darkness always preys on us and achieves it many times, or with a majority of unbalancing then. This is the point, the effect that we say, effect number one, to be able to really understand and in a more complete way, because the sun does not increase in size, because if we are in a center of balance, then obviously everything, the entire universe revolves around us. What if it revolves around us? Well, keeping a certain distance, that is precisely why we are a center, and that is totally regulated by the source. If I didn't keep that distance, the sun would embrace us. Obviously, we can think at first, but it doesn't happen like that because you maintain that distance. So for you to see here, we want to see a fractal. It would be, for example, a magnet that represents electromagnetism. So here's the block wall on this block wall. Well, it keeps the two poles equidistant. That is why any particle of iron that you project, if it is located exactly in this center, then it goes neither up nor down, but is in that perfect balance. But nothing more than that, you lose your balance a little since you go to either of the two portions. Well, this is the situation of the human being. The human being is here. And then, just like here, as we are seeing, it is a tenacity of tensions that protect, let's say so, or form two steroids, but with one central, since the human being has that same situation. So the entire cosmos is rotating, we can say, around it, because it is in the center of balance, and also in relation to not affecting the human being and maintaining itself precisely, because that size of the sun we also have. And we have to say in support that the sun in our model, because it is not really a spherical body, but we have already shared that the sun is rather a focus, a pole of a toroid that is the sun, moon toroid, and that has a tubular structure, and then that tubular structure of that emission, because it can adapt to the observer. It can adapt, and that can also be influencing that you really see that same size, because it is not a concrete body that it does not have. Can we say that elasticity or a solid body? No. If they are not emissions, they are emissions from that focus, which is a torus along with the moon, that can also contribute precisely to maintaining that distance and that size. Therefore, we say that it remains constant in relation. Everything remains constant in relation to the center, which is the size of the envelope, remains constant, as we were seeing here in relation to the center of balance, which is the human being, as we have already exposed here, is in a center of a magnet, even us, to decode the different movements, since we also had a structure here in yellow, which would be a center of balance. And then with two pores, well, this is precisely where the human being is. That also explains why that sun cannot get too close and has to maintain precisely that distance in relation to this center, that is the human being. That would be effect number one, to understand the EL, the constant size that does not vary from the sun, and also to be able to understand it, since having, well, we bring, well, this second effect that so this effect is that the sun does not really approach in a straight line, as might be assumed, because if we see here, we assume that the Earth, on that same Earth, which would be a single spheroid, we see a road and we see a helicopter that begins to approach us. Well, by following that straight line, well, then we would say, well, if that's how the sun does not increase in size, well, we say it does not follow a straight line. Otherwise, the sun follows a curved line, because here we have also exposed in other videos that we would be here. This is a curved line representative of a volume, and this would be the other spheroid in red, and that one and another are getting closer through this movement. So we have said that. Isn't it coming in a straight line if it doesn't come in a curved line? And what would that curve be like? Well, that curve would be established. Here they also have another representation of the sky spheroid and the ground spheroid that is ours. We would be here in this part, and the curve would be that they always remain 200 kilometers apart between the two. Therefore, if we are in a center, as we say, and the sun has to rotate, well, these 200 kilometers to, well, as we see here, it has to be maintained. It has to be maintained that distance. In relation to us, who are the center of balance, and also us. We have explained that in others on another previous occasion, as for example, we explained it here, that if they rotate in opposite directions, this would be our concave spheroid, and this would be the other spheroid rotating in the opposite direction. The two get closer until we reach, for example, the part of the vertical where the sky would be, the sun in the most part. Higher above our heads, we can say, well, we also explain it by saying that they are really getting closer, but this would be equivalent. If they maintain that distance, we can say the sun is getting closer and rising. While the Earth is getting closer to the sun, but instead of rising, descending in such a way that the two remain this same distance apart. That's another way of putting it, the sun approaching, rising, and the Earth approaching the sun, but descending. And that is equivalent to what is shown in this diagram, that this would be the concave floor that we are located on, and this would be the other spheroid, because then the sun would be moving in the other spheroid. But notice that between the two spheroids, there are always these 200 kilometers apart, and we are here in this center. And what would then be the vision of the sun? Well, then we would see the sun appearing here on the horizon, but notice that this distance goes, well, it is maintaining. It is maintaining the 200 kilometers. Therefore, the sun is not really getting closer. And this is very, let's say, very empowering to really feel that the source has placed us here as a project of itself, of its maximum creation. And the darkness, well, all this, well, it totally silences us. Therefore, we say, and we continue in this idea that both steroids, because they maintain this 200 kilom separation and the human being here, and therefore, if so, then we can affirm that the sun does not approach the spectator. The sun does not approach the spectator in this explanation and in this understanding, but rather the sun unfolds in front of the observer, and the word unfold, because we have here a fan that comes to us very well to give this whole idea if we are here in the center of union of this fan. well, the fan deploys as you are seeing, and the distance in repair with this center is always the same. So that makes it very sympathetic and very understandable that the sun does not increase in size in our model, where they are two separate spheroids and they maintain that separation. And this also empowers us because it lets us know that we are a central project of the source. That is why it is so important not to let ourselves be unbalanced by this darkness, to always be willing until the end, even to sacrifice our physical body instead of maintaining our body above all else. Etheric that is imperturbable, and this darkness has no access to that. We end up wishing strength for everyone at this end of the cycle time. Greetings. We titled this video Cosmos Earth Toroid Brief Description 6, Cosmos Earth Toroid number 110. We make this video on July 18th, 2021, in a situation of compliance with a dark agenda that goes: progressively and in a cunning way, since fulfilling its objective, evidently, but we say that ultimately the outcome will always be positive for the human being, that until the end he defends his own interior, his own convictions, and does not allow himself to be seduced by an interest. Exterior simply, but is based above all on his own consciousness. So with this video we resume, and we want to finish, well, a series of, as its title says, brief description, because we have more than 100 videos from this series on space, so we have considered it very convenient then to make a series of videos. With a limited number, we do not want to exceed 9, so that simply one person can have with those 9 videos a general idea of this theory and this model that we consider the truest, the deepest, the simplest, and the one that gives us a knowledge of all this reality. Then these about 3 videos that we are missing to do about this brief description. Well, what we are going to talk about above all is the movement or genesis, because it is important to have a clear idea of the succession of days and nights, and also the seasons, that is, like the number of hours of light and darkness, since it oscillates throughout the year. This must be given a coherent explanation, and also that it can be reflected, that the person may have a mental scheme. And we have already announced that the mental scheme of our model is somewhat more complicated because there are 2 movements, which are simultaneous and are opposite, unlike the other theories. But if we go part by part, which is what we intend to do, then we can understand and really understand and see and verify that it really is the most even aesthetic and balanced model that we are going to compare with the other models. So this is the video, the title, the scheme that we are going to develop. And then, well, since here in this first image we also put the simplified scheme, because what we want to do to understand precisely the most difficult question, which is the succession of the stations, because we want to present in this video above all the basic scheme. Simplified, original, and that serves us, and that is really repeated because it is simply the same. Therefore, although it seems like a more complicated model at first, it really is not the one that we consider the most science, because they are always the same steps. The source always acts in the simplest and cheapest way, and we can always say so. So here you see just the simplest model. This is a view from Taflo's view from above. 2 steroids, one that we can say the spheroid we step on, the concave epheroid in blue and the red. And notice that they rotate according to the arrows in different directions, because this is really the base model. And we've also put a heart here on the right, because we want to say, and you will see in all our videos, that its movement is actually pulsations, just as a heart is exactly the same, because everything is made for the human being. And that is the most important thing about this model, that everything is really in the creation of the Creator, since He has done it precisely by thinking and building this space suitable for the human being, and this system that are really pulsations, as we are going to go, seeing as the daily solar pulsation. So in this video, as we already say, we want to present the basic creative scheme, and from here we'll simply see it in a simple way. And already in the following videos, we'll see that it becomes a little more complicated, evidently, to interpret the seasonal change, that is, how the hours of light increase and how they change in relation to the hours of shadow. So this mini-series, we're going to go a little fast. Remember that what we want to do in this mini-series, well, is to present precisely in these final videos the genesis of this model. And the genesis of this model, well, it is the movement that occurs, because all genesis is a transformation. So we are going to present a series of schemes or diagrams that are going to be the scheme primary of the solar route, the scheme of the stations YY. We are going to touch briefly, since also the same thing that would be a continuation with the precessional cycle, that is the daily solar cycle, the cycle of the seasons, and the cycle, the possible precessional cycle. We say possible because it really is poorly verifiable on an empirical level. So we can say in this particular video, as we say, we want to present this basic scheme because it's the one I know. Are you going to repeat it? Y is the basis of everything, that of all creation. So in this basic scheme, this is simply a reminder, because they are, as you're seeing here, because a creation. By we can say this by the source. It is decomposed into two poles, and two poles with two movements. We've been sharing that for a long time. So this is the schema, the primary creative schema that is present, and this is the important thing we want to emphasize, which is present at all levels of development of creation. It's always the same scheme that you're seeing here, that we've explained too. Two spins, two forces spinning in opposite directions and meeting in one center and pressing to continue with that creation. So let's briefly remember in a quick way, because these are all compilations, that this is the primary creative scheme. So a triunity, as you're seeing here, three colors, that is 1 and 1 central axis and 2 poles, 1 central axis and 2 poles. Simply, this is the PRI unitary scheme. So who forms it? Well, it is formed by the ether push, or the invisible hands of the source, that form two polar vortices, as we are seeing here, which rotate and rotate differently in opposite directions, and which pulsate and pulsate, maintain this physical and spiritual reality that we call the Concave Toroid Earth, or we can give it other names. The important thing is that they are understood. Then, through successive steps, because this triunity creates two pole vortices, and they form and they are concretized in pairs. Pairs of spheroids, because everything is always even. So, and that's why it's like all of creation, they're actually toroids within toroids. That is why we have explained it a few times with Matryoshka dolls, that each one has one inside, and that is how they are formed. But we say they are not unitary, they are dual, there cannot be just one, but they always go in pairs. That is why they are the two pairs of an inner spheroid, convex sky, and another. Further away, we can say more exterior. which is ours, which is the concave spheroid in blue, simply. And those movements that we've already seen are rotational. So everything consists of that model of a repetition and a repetition through duplication, because everything is all are pairs. As we have just said, it is a duplication and therefore also a multiplication. What of this primary scheme? Of this primary scheme that through dual pulsations create all reality. And so we have already said many times that from this center, for example, we have this line that would be a polar creative force that goes in one direction and another that goes in the opposite direction. This one goes to the right and this one goes to the left. The two meet at this point, and this is a first pulse and then another second pulse, because everything has to be dual, and then the two spheroids are formed, and that's repetitive. Until we reach our own concrete reality, in which we have already said it in other videos, what is the concretization? Well, the spheroid, with how we can say that we step on, is the soil that we step on here on a beach. All this is, and this is the line that separates the two spheroids and the other spheroid, because it would simply be the sky. And here they have it in a schematic form, and here in a real and experiential form. So simply we have been exposing it for some time, and now in this video what we want is to start from the beginning, to be able to later make more understanding what is somewhat more complex of the seasons. So we want you to see this diagram that we have just developed. We tell you, simplified diagram of the solar cycle. And we have given it the category of equinoctial, to say that this is not the seasons, but rather it is being taken in the direction of the equinox. In the sense that the equinox, it is precisely when they last have the same duration of light as darkness. We can say, and that happens on the equinox, on the two equinoxes, on a very specific date. Well, this is that scheme then, because this is the simplified scheme. So we see the more exterior, it is telling you, it is taking the scheme as a pole, the female pole, which would be the concave spheroid that we step on, and the other spheroid is the one with the perimeter circle in red. And this would be, in this case, when you take the two poles as a polar unit, since the sky would be the masculine and the earth we step on would be the feminine. And then here we want you to clearly understand this first step of how you move, because this spheroid goes in one direction. That would be like you're seeing here Estrogida, and this other one, well, goes in the direction of Bogida. And if we put it now only at that equinoctial site, well, imagine this spheroid spinning to the left and this other spheroid spinning to the right, actually in directions, in opposite directions. But there's another way to represent it that we've already represented it here. It is a view from above. The red would be the sky spheroid rotating in this one, rotating in one direction, and the ground that we have therefore rotating in another opposite direction. Here we have already changed, so we have both turning. And what's this guy like with the pulsations? Well, if we have here, for example, the sky spheroid in red, well, here at 6 the first pulse occurs and the two arises begin. One in one direction, the sky and the ground we step on, in the other direction they arrive at 12, since maximum sunlight, and then it continues. And here at 18 o'clock, well, it is the second pulse where the two come together and pulse again, then a pulse at 6 o'clock and another at 18 o'clock. In form, we can say like this. We have explained this in other videos in opposite form, because the two spheroids are going to join each other, the lines of force of the two spheroids. Therefore, the source does not allow it precisely for the extraction to exist, and then it pulses. At the taking that equinoctial sense, we have said at the beginning, since it would be at 6 o'clock at dawn and at 6 o'clock at dusk, and then that's seen in. We can say this in a wave model that is easier to perceive simply. We have already expressed it in many other videos at 6 o'clock because the sun, and now taking only the sun reference point, because this becomes complicated. But we are interested that you have this clear idea. At 6 the sun begins to appear. arrives at 12, then descends at 6 p.m. And at 6 p.m. it continues to descend, continues until 24 p.m., which is pure night, and then again until 6. This is a day, really this is one day, and so constantly, because the following days with those two pulsations, then both spheroids pulse, and then they get that motor impulse at dawn and at dusk. And what we want you to see, so that you keep in mind this initial first model, two spheroids. Imagine two balls, one spinning. This is in a single plane, but imagine that it is a spheroid, evidently a ball, because it is rotating, for example, from right to left and is inside this other one that completely surrounds it. But here, only so that you can see it, that look at these lines, well, it is the other way around. They go from left to right, and both rotating this can be imagined. The mind can do it. It can be imagined because it is not difficult to imagine and even practically do this in a ball. Rotating in that sense, we are going to assume strophiles from right to left, the inner ball being the sky and the other ball being the ground. Well, from left to right simultaneously. And then now looking at this schema, we'll just think about how it happens. It is not day and night. And here this scheme is simplified. No, this becomes complicated. But what interests us now is that they have this image so that they can keep in mind, because you can move on later to when it becomes complicated and the time difference is established throughout the seasons. But then this stops so they can see what day and night would be like. Well, simply here in this spheroid, well, here would be its pole, its sun pole and its moon pole. And in ours, well, here would be the Arctic and here would be the Ontario. Really practical. And then this is rotating in this shape inside the other. Imagine that this one is still, for example, so that it is easier to imagine. And this is the one that rotates. Well, if this one is rotating and this is the sun, and this is the sun focus, well, evidently in this part, when it arrives through this part here, that's why we have put this part. We have not put it with all these little points that are the night. When it is in this part rotating, well, it will illuminate half of the earth, the other half is fierce, and in that half it will be day, and on the other it will be night. But since it has to continue rotating, well, it continues rotating. And then this whole part that we have put with these little dots that you are seeing here, we have dotted it to simulate the night. And then when they continue their movement, it will illuminate the other part, obviously, and then here it will be day, and here it will be night, and so on constantly, day and night, day and night. That's within our imagination. Obviously, we say this so that they have this first. The step is simple, and then it will be a little more complicated to see the difference, how it increases, how the hours of light and the hours of darkness increase. But it's the same movement, and here we have said to think about this stationary period. Well, don't think I'm standing still now. They simply think that they are both rotating with each one in their direction, since the same thing is formed, obviously. The same thing is formed, the same day and the same night, according to. Depending on the part of the earth you are illuminating, obviously. And then, what would the seasons be like? And that's already it. In the following videos, we will explain it better, because due to a difference between the two spheroids of inclination 1 with respect to the other, then if this is the earth spheroid and this is the spheroid is heaven, because this inclination, for example, here, well, it would give you the luminosity of this focus, would illuminate a lot. And it would be the summer solstice, and this would be the winter solstice. And we will explain this more in another video, because this would be the official explanation. According to the tilt of the Earth's axis, as you can see, this would be summer in this part and simultaneously in the other part, because it's winter. And when the Earth ends in the other direction, then it will be the other way around. This is the official app. But in our model, it is not only the Earth that goes, the one that goes, that is the displacement around the Sun, that produces this phenomenology of the seasons, but it will be both. The two spheroids are the ones whose respective inclinations will produce the difference in light hours. Often light of sun and darkness, and they will play the seasons for you. This is the representation of the summer solstice, and this is the representation of the winter solstice. And we'll see that in the next videos more closely now what I want and what we want in this video to keep this image, this simple previous image of the two steroids in motion. And that movement, precisely if this is at one extreme, there is the sun in this bud and the other, the moon, since this is the focus, and this focus will illuminate, will create the day, and will create the night in succession. We end here wishing strength for all of us who are awakening and understanding this whole reality that has been hidden and silenced. Greetings. We title this video Cosmos, Earth, Toroid. Brief description 7. Cosmos, Earth, Toroid number 111. We make this video on July 22nd, 2021 in a situation of compliance with a dark agenda, but also observing in a hopeful way. Can we say so? Finally, hopefully, an increasingly progressive awakening of people who have not completely lost their discernment, and that therefore gives us a confidence in the human being, a confidence that goes further. We can say that about the practical and observable results, because we know that there are other results that are imperceptible right now at the moment we are in. But they are true spiritual growth and progress and approach to source. Therefore, within this negativity of this time, we also have to know what is going to occur and is occurring. Well, a judgment that for many, for a majority, will be negative. Obviously, it is all we perceive, but for others. What do we say the word? Many, but many, evidently in smaller numbers of a majority, of a zombieized majority style, having completely lost distance. Well, for a minority, well, it is a moment of discovery of everything that has been hidden, and of also being hopeful that a light, a permanent light that is inside us, since it will project us into a dimensional future towards a leap. Because it's essential, it is necessary, obviously, to have to suffer this step, this bitter drink, but we must look beyond, and then be with inner strength, even if the physical body begins to fail us. Even if it starts to fail them, evidently because of all this poisoning in all fields. Okay, so we in this video want to focus on perhaps the most difficult aspect of understanding, which is the passage of the seasons. In the model of our Earth, our concave toroidal Earth, and say that it is difficult to say that we can visualize it mentally, but step by step, because it is easily understandable. It simply consists, and here we put the scheme so that you can see it, it simply consists of. See, in perceiving mentally, even through schemes, that we are going to try to share a series of schemes so that they make it more understanding, since two spheroids, two spheres, two balls, one inside another, the sphere, sky more inside, and the ground sphere that we step on more outside, as we have already said, the two rotating in opposite directions, in that turn that gives one. The two together and make a 24-hour cycle, since they click on, that we have simplified them by the dawn at 6 a.m. We can say, and the sunset around 6 p.m. That is where the pulsation is received with the source that is at the center of all creation and directs all creation. So there is the engine, and simply in that movement, well, it also forms a different inclination of the spheroids, of the axis of the spheroids. And that different inclination that we have wanted, and we are going to continue specifying here by putting them separate, although we already know that they go one inside another, but those in separate positions too, for a little more explanatory. Because the different inclination, as you are seeing here, the inclination is simply of the perpendicular type. This would be Sun, Moon, the axis of the convex spheroid, and evidently this is the axis, and the other axis is perpendicular to so this would be at the equinoxes. But notice that this orientation changes until it reaches a solstice, and that they are more focused one in relation to the other said axis, and then here would be the summer solstice, when there are more hours of sun, and at the other opposite point, when the entire process takes place, as we are going to continue to see. Well, here notice that the sun, the sun spheroid, the sun pole, is focused on the part of the southern hemisphere, while here it is focused on the northern hemisphere. So here will be the winter solstice for those of us in the north, and here will be the summer solstice for those of us in the north. So simply that inclination, instead of what the official theory tells us of a displacement of the Earth by millions of kilometers around the sun, totally for us absurd and meaningless, since the source makes it easier, simply a small space from which we cannot leave, where the spheroids are, and simply the movement of the spheroids in opposite turns and making their different inclinations of their axis. Well, it marks all the difference. Hours of light occur when you are in the northern hemisphere at the summer solstice, when there are many more hours of light, and vice versa. When you arrive in the hemisphere, it is at the winter solstice. That inclination of those axes makes it a much longer night. And here is also what is called, which the Therapanists cannot give any correct interpretation, evidently the day of 24 hours of light, and the night, which is also called the polar night of 24 hours of darkness. But then here it simply consists of that type of inclination, and this is what we want to share. So we are going to remember the primary creative scheme, because it is simply the primary creative scheme that gives rise to all these changes. Is it the same scheme back then? Let's see the stations that, as we already said, they are due to a different influence of the inclination of the axis of two spheroids during the annual cycle. During the annual cycle, that inclination varies, and then more hours of sunshine occur, for example at the summer solstice, and fewer hours of sunshine at the winter solstice. So that different and changing inclination of the axis of the two spheroids. The concave spheroid ground, that is the one we step on, and the convex sky, which is the one we see vertically, since it is what originates the solstices and equinoxes. So simple, deeply and deeply. So this is going fast, because this is remembering the initial schema. A center emits from itself two sensory vortices of opposite turns that create this entire reality. That is why precisely in this reality, rotating in opposite directions, since it is what is also seen. It is reflected in what we are saying, the succession of days and noxias in a simpler way, but also the succession of the solstices, the equinoxes, and the return to the other. Solstice really, and everything is 1-2 creative pulses. Notice that everything is dual, 2 pulsations, 2 spheroids like this repeatedly, and this is the most elementary initial primary scheme. From a center, 2 forces are produced in opposite directions. One from left to right, and another from right to left in a downward direction. And here a pulsation occurs, and then another pulsation occurs, because everything is dual, and then they are produced through different steps, because the creation of 2 spheroids, and these 2 spheroids, as you are seeing, they obviously have an axis, they have a central axis, each one of them, the inclination of both axes, one with respect to the other, that is what gives you that difference. Hours of sunshine and hours of darkness, simply the same scheme. And then the person who has still forgotten it above comes here to remember it, because the official explanation of the heliocentric model, as we have already said, is that the Earth, This Earth that we have here is moving through an immense space. The Sun is located 15,000 kilometers away, so it surrounds the Sun, it tells us, and then in 365 days, well, it changes. This would be its axis. The inclination of its axis changes. Sometimes for 6 months it gives it more sun in the part of the northern hemisphere, and other times then it gives another 6 months more in the southern hemisphere. And that's what they tell us. And this official, because we say, no, that space does not exist. The source creates an entire space like a limited house, limited by it, limited by the inside and the outside, and there it produces everything. And not only their spaces, living spaces, but dimensions, which is also the most important thing, obviously. And the dimension, a descending dimension away from the source and a dimension approaching the source. That is why we say that our model is, we can say so, the most complete spiritual and physical material. And then to remember that all this is consistent with all of them. With the entire normal cycle, this of that wave model, that this we are going to remember this simple model, that this is from the point of view of a spectator and in a located hemisphere. Well, here we are in the northern hemisphere, for example, and then at 6 o'clock the sun rises and goes until 12 o'clock the maximum night arrives, and then it begins to rise 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, and again at 6 here, well, the new day begins. Then this would be a day and one night, and then it goes on. But really, instead of following this line, everything is around a center. As we know, then this point that we have laid out here, well, it really is here, because everything would be like this. But this is from a view from a single hemisphere, single steroid point of view. We can say that this is the most basic part, but we already say that for the seasons, they are 2 steroids and then 2 steroids. Notice that here, this would be its axis, the axis of this spheroid, and this other one would be the other axis, because their inclination, one with respect to the other, here they are converging. So if there is this maximum convergence, well, here, if this is the convex hemisphere sky and here is the sun, well, here is where it is giving greater luminosity at the summer solstice, and then here the opposite. Well, here notice that it is produced and they diverge then. They diverge, and then here obviously they are totally divergent, then they are totally divergent, and if they're totally divergent here, what does that mean? Because behind that is where the sun is then illuminating the other hemisphere, as we have already seen in the other representation, in the other scheme. Therefore, the opposite rotation, as we are seeing here, rotating in one direction and rotating in another, and the inclination of the axis originates the succession of days and nights and the seasons. So, the difference in daily light and darkness during the year is due, as we have said, to the different inclination of the axis of the 2 spheroids so simply. And now this scheme would be to see the simplest point to understand the succession of days and nights, which is different when the inclination of one is changed with respect to another, because this inclination, if you remember, we said that each new toroid is formed in a perpendicular way, that is, they have to be formed in perpendicularity, just as also the energy to capture the energy of the ether, since the sense of perpendicularity is also fundamental. So then notice that the closest to the source has to be in the perpendicular direction. Would this be an image to see in the simplest way the succession that we have already seen in a previous video of days and nights, we can say in the sense of the equinoctial, we can say then. This would obviously be the sky in the spheroid, because that would be its axis. The east axis would be North Pole, South Pole, the Sun, Moon, and this would be its axis. Because on Earth, as we have put here Arctic and Antarctic, because this would be its axis, obviously, and notice that they are perpendicular, so they are perpendicular also means that you are closest to the source. Then there, if only this movement existed, well, the duration of the days and nights, well, it would be the same, and it would be one thing, and it would be one. A state, a very balanced state, we can say, but it was varying, because then you see, we have already explained it in the previous video, that here if we rotate, for example, in this sense, if it is from these arrows, this steroid, well, here is the sun, well, it will illuminate half of a hemisphere on this side, it will be light, and the other half will be dark. If it continues to rotate, then it will change, as we have already seen in the previous video, and then here will be the light, and in the other will be the darkness. But this is the diagram for you to see the simplest and most initial way. The simplest and initial way is the opposite turn of two steroids. But as we say precisely here, that they are in this perpendicularity that we just said, since one varies with respect to the other, and that according to that variation is what gives you more illumination. And more heat in the northern hemisphere at the solstice, and then that movement continues as it continues. Well, it passes to the winter solstice. So simply all this is something simple and wonderful, and in the simplest way when a person comes to really understand it. So we have already said this. Well, this is the wave type system, but in reality, instead of continuing like this, everything comes here around this center, producing these different ones. Inclinations, as we have already said. And so for you to see, we've also made this diagram so that you can see the question of why at, for example, at the summer solstice that we have here, we've put this line in red. So this line is the one that comes here at the summer solstice and continues here. This other piece. And so this means, and we have wanted to expose it this way because everything is easy, that is, it goes in the same system, that these would be the hours, the duration of hours of light at the summer solstice. Many more than, for example, hours of darkness, as we are doing here, many fewer. So this would be the summer otis, but what would it be like at the equinox? Well, at the equinox, it would last the same. That is why we are seeing that at this equinox that is closer to the center, we can say like this. Notice that this segment has the same length as this other segment. That is, it is totally balanced. So this would be what we have seen previously of the equinoctial day. We can say that it has the same hour of light as it does of darkness. But then the upward movement of the sun continues throughout the year. And then, well, if here we are seeing that this is the balanced one, then the next. Notice that it is already longer. It is already longer because the hours of light are greater than the hours of darkness, of shadow, as you can see. And if it continues throughout the year, increasing that inclination that we have said about the two axes of steroids, then you reach the maximum we have placed here. We have only put 3 points. Obviously, this would be to do it in a computer program and see the two sides, how it is developing simultaneously, but we want it to be understood, and if it is understood, well, the person, even if he has the facility to make other schemes even more complete, even some type of computer animation composition, well, that would be the perfect thing, obviously. Then we want it to be understood. Then the sun continues to rise, it rises to the maximum. Notice then, here it is already at the summer solstice. The maximum, look, all the hours, how long this cement is, all the hours of light and all the short shade, as you were seeing. And then, what would happen? Well, it would happen that later, as it continues to advance, as we are seeing here, well, now it would begin to descend. Now it would begin to descend. As you can see, it's still much larger, but here comes a point where it equalizes. And when it equalizes at this equilibrium point is where the pulsations occur. So here would be at this point and in this segment, this would be the vernal equinox, while the other one would be the summer solstice. So here we have laid it out in two parts so that you can see this 6 months in which the light is growing, the increase in hours of light in the station, because that is what defines the stations. The stations define the largest number. In the difference in daylight hours throughout the year compared to darkness. So look, we've just explained this. It reaches the maximum. Now it starts to go down as they are seeing it equals, and then at this moment when it equalizes, we can say, well, then the next pulse occurs. The first would be that of dawn, and the second would be sunset. So notice this turn in this direction, and now we have put here for a continuation in the other turn. But all this is from the vision of a steroid, that is the subject located in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere, and seeing the sun as it moves. Although we already know that it is not only the sun that is moving, the same subject is also moving, although he does not realize it then when he has completed this cycle of these 6 months. Well then, now below, well, the opposite is coming. they are seeing it. Does it start to increase then? It begins to increase from an initial balanced point, just like here, because now the hours that we have put here of darkness in blue begin to increase, and the hours of darkness in blue are increasing totally. So notice that this is the circle that he makes, and then continuing, because so is the one in the other way. That in this way, and notice that this is the same initial scheme that we have seen. Notice that evidently the same initial scheme is being fulfilled. Two forces that are separating in opposite directions, and here they press, and again it continues and press and so on. And that's the engine of this creation, the simplest engine. Simpler and more complete, we can say, and now we want you to see the same thing. In the inclination, which is what marks the differences in hours of sunshine, that is the seasons. So we have put the two Spheroids here, separated first, then we are going to see sets. So to this initial point that we have seen, that is, notice it is in a perpendicularity, as we have said, initial. But then a rise begins. Now we are already seeing both. A rise of the sun begins, because this would be the one that has the little points here. It would be the convex sun hemisphere. And then notice that it is tilting one towards others. It is tilting towards each other. And then here would be the summer solstice. Because look, there is the sun. The sun focus is focusing. It is converging in the northern hemisphere preferably. And then this is the maximum hours of light and heat too. And it usually is. And then look, and then, but from here, well, then the opposite begins. It begins to separate. They begin, instead of converging here, that they are converging. Well, here, this angle that you are seeing here is already beginning to become larger. The second pulsation arrives here, and then the angle now begins to reverse, and then let's say the sun focus, well, it focuses on the other hemisphere, as we are seeing here, and then here until this one arrives. Point that, look, we have put the sun focus here because it is focusing directly now, no longer the northern hemisphere, but the southern hemisphere. So here, the southern hemisphere is obviously where it is, where it will be happening, because the solstice, the summer solstice, that is on the other side. So look here, it would be the opposite. This would be solstice. Summer maximum focus in the northern hemisphere, and this would be winter solstice, maximum focus in the southern hemisphere, so simply. But notice that this is the same even as the wave system. We have already separated it so that the two steroids can be seen separately. But actually, like the sun, convexus hemisphere is inside. Well, then we want you to also see it from this other scheme, that you can see that this is really more real. Because what would the two steroids be like then? The two steroids, this would be the convex steroid in the sky with the sun and the moon as spotlights, and the other would be the steroid we just said, the concave where we are. And then, look, the orientations vary, and here they are focused. Notice that they both rotate to focus. Notice he's focusing on the northern hemisphere. The sun, this would be the summer solstice, and then the reverse path begins. It reaches the point again, the point of maximum balance in this cross that we can say, and now it keeps pressing, changing its orientation. And here we are seeing, since finally, well, the sun focus, well, the one that is focusing, well, is the southern hemisphere. As you are seeing in blue, it is focusing on the southern hemisphere, EH, while here it is focusing on the northern hemisphere. Then this is the summer solstice and this is the winter solstice. So this is so simply the scheme that we believe that if the person has not come to understand it completely well, then simply rewind it again and see what really well it is. It is affordable, it is difficult to represent the two steroids moving and pressing both in at that point. We recognize that, which is difficult to see mentally, but part by part, as we have done, because evidently one arrives, and one rebuilds, evidently. So we want to make a final synthesis of this video in which we say that it is our belief and our conviction that the source creates the model more simple and profound. And what would that model look like? Well, because it establishes a creation as a space limited by the inside where the source is pulsating and by the outside. Also notice that it is yellow and on the outside. And where cycles are established in this limited space, a series of cycles that bring you closer and further away from this source. And place the source, well, the human being. And this is the most important thing for us as the center of this dimensional balance. Therefore, this is the importance and transcendence of the actions and omissions of the human being. And especially at this time when an end of the cycle and an upcoming readjustment is occurring, we wish strength for all those who are awakening and understanding this reality. And above all, that know that they do not stray away from their own inner consciousness. Greetings! We titled this video Cosmos, Earth, Torus, brief description 8, Cosmos, Earth, Torus, number 112. We make this video in the context of July 28, 2021, in compliance with a dark agenda that we see that progressively more people are waking up, although obviously and unfortunately, and also predictably, based on all the millennial indoctrination, since there are one minority who awaken in relation to the majority of this humanity. But we say that quality is always what imposes itself on quantity. That is why we know that finally. Cyclically, the source always makes the human being persevere in himself, in his own interior, since he always makes him emerge. We can say, and the opposite, because humans and entities that do not follow the established rule of justice, universal justice, simply because they descend. So, in relation to this video that we remember the topic that we are dealing with the stations, because we want to continue the stations now making a comparison between the model that we are disseminating and the other models that we consider to have more, we can say more logical, because there are others such as hollow Earth and crater Earth, which for us do not deserve to lose any type of energy. Well, in discrediting, we believe that they discredit themselves. If a person really investigates the fundamental as the fundamental is, to, for example, see the solution given to the stations, the explanation given to the stations. Therefore, in this video, we are going to make that comparison. So we are going to develop it at an initial point, say, the implications that the stations have in our Toroid Earth Cosmos model. And then we are going to compare our theory in relation to the stations with the official heliocentric theory, with the flat Earth, and with the concave cellular Earth, which are what we consider to be. They have, we can say, a certain sustenance, but incomplete in our opinion. So what are the implications of the seasons? In our model, first of all, since you will know that there are two movements that we have here, which go in opposite directions, one towards each other, and press in two equidistant places, we can say, well then, if the speed established in the official model, displacement of the Earth. In Ecuador, it is about 1600 km/h in Ecuador, according to the official theory. Well, evidently, if here there are two movements that make that same displacement, then they will therefore have to go at a slower pace, evidently and effectively, well, at half. Therefore, we say that the movement of the spheroids would be ours. In our model, since calmer, it would be about 800 km/h and not about 1600 kilometers. So that's one of the implications that our model has, that we consider it, well, in this sense, well, more adjusted, more to this reality. And that's exactly what we put here to explain precisely how they are moving in. One to meet each other and in supposed directions, since there is something similar to the circuit that two trains travel that go in different directions. Therefore, the speed has to be to comply, because in these they are close. Obviously, it has to be coherent with the official. Of course, yes, because seeing the established dimensions, terrestrial, which we think are correct, which are in general, are they accepted in the measurements that the official heliocentric model attributes to the Earth? And then also seeing the displacement of the Sun. Well, obviously, well, that would have to be a speed of 1600 at the equator, but we say yes, we are two movements. Well, then it would be each one of us in our concave spheroid, well, we would go at about 800 km/h. And another important implication of the stations in our model is that we say that if there are two spheroids which are concentric, as we are seeing here, the same center, one spheroid, more interior sky, and another more exterior, ground or concave, because this movement we have put here totally. If it is one movement, if they are two totally opposite movements, then that's it. They have to keep all the points of the two spheroids together. The equidistance has to be maintained. It has to be maintained at the same distance. So how do we explain this? Well, simply because if we say that it is totally opposite, not only that this spheroid goes from right to left, and this other one, ours, goes from left to right, but at the same time that it moves like a sphere. A spheroid with in two parts, so that it is totally opposite. If one goes down in its turn, another goes up. Then therefore, that distance is always maintained. And that is precisely what we have explained. In relation to the effect that the Sun does not increase in size, it does not increase in size, because if it is approaching us, we are in the concavity, and we also approach it, but it is approaching, rising. If we go down, then they compensate, and the distance is maintained. Therefore, see that this model, the source, is really we can say that's how it is. It is the cheapest, the simplest. The source does not create infinite distances of millions of kilometers, but it simply creates a closed space in which she, therefore, establishes the two basic rotational movements. And from there, well, everything is ordered, and everything is ordered in cycles. And it is not ordered at all, but it is ordered so that through these cycles, if what lasts in even people, especially in people, well, the balance, well, what will occur in that inner cyclical movement of two spheroids with that opposite movement, well, they will also be dimensional changes. And that is very important, dimensional changes, that we are really convinced that the people that we preserve above all in our own life, well, the union with our interior and the balance, well, we will advance towards the source, and the opposite, well, really well, it will be moving away from the source. Therefore, we see this as the most model, fair in all and more complete and simpler in all fields and in all aspects. So we say that this is the second implication, that a truly balanced distance is always maintained. And now we are going to buy this model in relation, above all, to the stations, what they tell us in a quick way, simply in the aspect of the stations, the other theories, so that we want to see that ours is not because it is ours, but, and it is open to all discussion, that we consider it the most, the truest, and the fairest. So the explanation given by the idiocentric theory, as you already know, is that the inclination of this Earth's axis in relation to this plane of the ecliptic where the sun is what produces the seasons. We have already seen that repeatedly, and we have to see this same picture, which is what they tell you, that here then it would be the solstice of all 6 months until reaching the summer solstice. Well, this is it. Inclination, because it is giving you more sun, and this other one is giving it to you in the other hemisphere. We have already seen that repeatedly, but we want to say first that this rotational movement of the Earth, which is what gives rise to the days and nights as we are seeing here, already represents a first stumbling block for the official theory, because then in this movement all the waters that occupy the majority of the Earth would have to be, well, they would have to be accumulated here in this line, and there would not have to be any type of mountain there, but it is not like that. It is not like that, not much less reality. Therefore, that already distorts this official heliocentric Earth. But now, in relation to the seasons, we want them to fall into this account that we have fallen into, that, for example, this is the Newtonian system of centrifugal and centripetal forces, which is also the same theory of Newton's gravity. Well, notice that, for example, this cube that we have here, if you take it and begin to establish, it is a movement around the center. That would be the translation in the stations, the translation of the Earth around the Sun. Well, from a first vertical part that we have here, well, it will go to the maximum in a part in a horizontal establishment, as you are seeing here, and then the water will not come out due to that force, to that centrifugal force that goes outward, counterbalanced by the human arm, that what keeps it. That is the Newtonian system that these stations explain to you. So they explain themselves by saying that here in its translation around the Earth's sun, notice that it has this type of inclination. This would be the solstice or the 6 summer months today that culminate in the summer solstice according to this plane of inclination, but it tells us that now here it passes through 2 intermediate planes, which would be the equinoxes of equilibrium, but that later, as it continues here, well, it has this inclination that you are seeing here. They have this inclination in such a way that then it is more in the southern hemisphere, where the sun would give more, in opposition to the other one that we have seen here. Well, we say, well, you realize that this inclination does not really correspond to the system of centrifugal and centripetal forces. It does not correspond, and because they would have to explain to us why this change occurs, because this is a change in relation to the original inclination. When you, a cube or any other body, well, you establish this rotation around you, well, there comes a moment when it stabilizes, as we are seeing stabilized here, then what? That stabilization remains, and if it does not remain like you, here you are putting it, that it has not remained but has been changed, because you have to explain it, and they do not explain it to you in any simple way. In a way, simply because then this, for us, is a total incoherence of the official heliocentric system. So because you can see here better what we are saying, well, this type of inclination, well, if this center, like the person we have seen with the cube, rotates through itself, then this same inclination must be maintained. You cannot move to this one so simply. And if it happens, you really have to give it an explanation, because that's not what happens. In practice, when people do that physical experimentation, then look, here, this is what they tell us, that it continues here, but we say, wouldn't that be what you're seeing here? This would be the inclination that has to remain here on this red line that we have set, and not this one that they set for us, because look, if they are here and begin to rotate the Earth around you, as it would have to be like this by the Newtonian system of centripods of forces, well, it has to continue like this. It has to continue, and it has to be. When you reach the stage, you have to continue like this, inclined in this same way that it is here and not what they tell us. Then this is this turn, because we remember that this is different from the Sani-Becot effect. Maybe we explain it in another video that it is a nut when it is not subjected to forces such as that of gravity, because then it by itself spontaneously changes the rotation and changes the direction of its axis. But not here, because here are the forces that tell us centrifugal forces and centrifugal forces. Therefore, this is this for us, since it makes us reject evidently that the established system is false. That is all our opinion, that in relation to the most important thing with the stations. Comparing our theory with this theory of heliocentric officiality hours, you already know that all the seasons are due to the simplest thing, which is the two asteroids, since the inclination of one with respect to the other is so simply what was marking the seasons and the solstices. And the equinoxes then and now in relation to the flat Earth you have here, well, we say, well, there is also a great coherence for us, because then in this type, if you are seeing here, he tells us that the sun, this would be the equator in this scheme, it would be the equator in a red line. The Tropic of Cancer, which would correspond to the northern hemisphere, well, this one would be orange, and the Tropic of Capricorn would be the other exterior in yellow. Well, if the sun, like, as they say, it gets closer to one more than another, and that is what marks the seasons for you. Well, it means that here, this circuit that runs, for example, in the Tropic of Cancer, is much smaller than the circuit that runs in the Tropic of Capricorn. So what does that mean? It means that then the sun would have to accelerate its speed, and that for us is not coherent. It is not coherent and would have to give an explanation as to why it is accelerating, obviously. How do they give it to us and consider it incoherent? Well, for us, this is an obvious failure for us of this model in relation to the Earth stations of the flat Earth, because then here the sun would have to travel circuits of different length and therefore would have to change its speed of movement. That is, it would have to accelerate and decelerate, and that for us he doesn't have. No, we don't find coherence with all reality. And also, evidently, in this same model, since there are also other difficulties, such as how to illuminate and not be visible simultaneously in both tropics when there is no apparent obstacle, such as the curvature in the other lands, even in the official and in ours. And as I would have to state then, those are for us, since failures or inconsistencies in this one. The model, as we see here, so that it is clearly seen that he would have to change his travel speed, then they can tell us, well, if he changes it. But for us, that is what, in our model, which is totally harmonic and symmetrical, we can say, well, it breaks that harmony and that symmetry. And now we are going to finish comparing it with the one that is most similar to ours, our model, which is the concave cellular Earth. For that, we say that the person can see this one. In video explanation stations 1 year in the concave Earth of the channel of I Got Question, but also based on Stephen Christopher, then here he explains to us what it is like in that video, because the stations in this concave cellular Earth, and then we already say it. We also say it, just like on the Earth, on the flat Earth, the only thing that moves is the sun, and the Earth is static. In this cell phone model, since the Earth is also static and the sun is the one that moves through, but on the other hand, in ours, they are the two spheroids, and that is the coherence of the symmetry. And we can say this about the balance of the source. So in this model, only the sun moves, and also by singing, they tell us, and in this video, you can see that the sun changes its speed of movement in the stations, which for us does not seem something to us. Something consistent that the sun has to change, because it tells us that it increases its speed at the solstices. So that in this video that you are watching at the winter solstice, and next, especially at the perihelion on January 3, well, that is when you are seeing here that then it would go at maximum speed. Then when it approaches the equinoxes in its movement, that speed would decrease. But we don't think so. We don't think so. as balanced as our model, as you are seeing here, but they tell us that from the winter solstice to summer, well, it begins to slow down because it is really getting closer to the equinox. And he also tells us in this same video that as a kind of proof that there is an analena that we have already seen in other times here that writes you this 8 that we have here, and then tells us that they tell us that due to the variable speed of the sun, EH, that we do not agree with that, but they tell us that due to that variable speed of that is what this 8 that they have here is formed, which is from the analemma, and we say no, it's not like that. Precisely in our theory, the analemma is the repeated confirmation of the primary basic scheme in our theory of the Earth. Concava toroid, that analemma, precisely, they will already be following it in, they will already know it in what our channel follows. Let this analemma notice that it forms that 8. And it is the one that from the beginning is the basic outline of our model, since it really forms that 8 at all levels. So that's why we say that ours, instead of wanting to give him that somewhat pilgrim explanation that the sun has to change and when changing speed, well, that produces this effect on you. Well, no, let's not give consistency to that explanation. On the other hand, in ours, it is precisely the consistency of our model and our primary scheme. Therefore, we have compared in this video since the stations in the alternative theories in relation to ours, and we believe that our explanation is the simplest, the deepest, and the most coherent as a heart does not suddenly start speeding up and then slowing down. It has changes, obviously, but they are much slower. It is a continuous and rested thing. This is how everything works in this reality, like the growth of life and children. It grows progressively and does not make those jumps that the flat Earth and the cellular Earth have to make it explanatory. Their model in ours, it has already been explained, is the 2 steroids. Mostly, well, at that type of speed, established at a rhythm like a heartbeat, a heart that is rhythmic and paced, and normally, well, they do not exist only on rare occasions when there are alterations, we can say, but normally it is a paced rhythm. So we end up here doing this synthesis. We say that in the model of the cosmos, toroidal Earth or toroidal concave Earth, and of all the changes occur in a dual equilibrium. And that is why they are the 2 movements in the 2 spheroids. In a dual and gentle balance, the passage of days and seasons is marked by a uniform rhythm similar to the beating of a heart. And then the entire creation that our model reflects, since it consists of a polar equilibrium. That is why we affirm that balance. And here we are referring to balance, even in everything and in the human being's own actions. We say that balance brings us closer to our inner source origin, because that it is the fundamental scheme. Then balance brings us closer to our source, inner origin, and imbalance, because it distances us. And now, at this moment and in this attack, we are convinced that a total imbalance is being formed with the human being. And the entities that promote this imbalance, since they will be removed from the source, without a doubt, for our, as you see, for our knowledge and our discernment. We end up wishing everyone strength in this final attack of the darkness cycle. Greetings. We titled this video Cosmos Earth Toroid, Brief Description 9, FTT 1113. We make this video on August 1st, 2021, in a situation that we define as apocalypse. Apocalypse in the sense more than of destruction, in the sense above all of revelation of everything that has been hidden. And they will already know that what has been hidden, since it is very negative, is to discover that the power established here externally. Well, it is darkness that governs all this reality. So, in this situation we can ask ourselves, what does this theory of the cosmos, toroidal earth or toroidal concave earth contribute? What do you bring to this onslaught of darkness? Because really, when we are in a survival situation, it is difficult to focus on another. Question that is not precisely dodging precisely these attacks. So what can you contribute? Well, we say at least to ourselves personally, because it contributes to us. It gives us essential knowledge of this present, but also of a near future, a near dimensional future, and we say that we are going to share in this video. We are going to share that this model is the most aesthetic, the most beautiful, also that it is functional. Functional in the sense that it is something alive. It's the expression of something alive. The essential motor is precisely a force, an intelligent force, super intelligent we can say, and we also have to add the qualifier of fair. It is fair, although it may seem totally unfair to us right now, obviously, but we have already discussed that in other topics and in other videos about the need for free will. Can we say then? In this video, we are going to carry out a synthesis, a temporal and temporal spatial reminder, in the sense of remembering the movement again, because time is the measure of the movement then. That is the cycles, because they occur here, and that is as if we were to say the engine of creation, and synthesis also, spatial, in exposing and remembering the shape plus the shape of the cosmos, because they are united. Indeed, time and space are indissoluble, but it has different degrees, and then we. That's what we're going to do in this video. Therefore, we here and now on this date of this attack of darkness, because the question may arise, if we are checking that the ship is sinking, well, right now, what does it matter to us, the shape of the ship? But we say, well, the shape of the ship can matter, because it can tell us. Perhaps since it is a ship of the totality, what is the most correct action to take on this ship while it is sinking? We can say this because in reality, everything is cyclical, and everything would be a change simply, and therefore, knowing what our behavior should be, our most correct behavior in this change that is going to occur according to everything. Our insight, well, we already know other cycles. So as we say, we're going to develop about 3 points. First, talk and remember the existential, temporal and spatial rhythm in relation to time and space. And we are going to give examples, fractals of breathing and the solar route in relation to movement, because so that they are always being aware that we are the center of this dimension, and therefore the cycles that occur in our organism, well, they are the ones who project, the ones who really project this universe. No, that is, it is not that the universe creates us, but rather we are the center of creation, and therefore we are more. We can say just as important, but we can say more definitive than the entire outer universe, which is the physical part, because we also have then the etheric part of the source, which is there. That is what is essential and what we have to protect, especially in this attack of darkness. So this would be point number 1. Point number 2. Review, put a series of diagrams of this movement, motor, and the 1.3 that we consider important. We are going to show, according to our opinion and according to our argument, that the model of the TIERRA toroid cosmos has a superior aesthetic to all other models. And the person who is intuitive, well, Perhaps this can be a proof that what is true is also usually beautiful and balanced and fair. And we are going to see the difference with other theories. And we really discovered this in the end because we have been piecing together point by point. So when the essential puzzle is already in place, well, we are amazed when we say it, but it is also the most aesthetic and also the most fair and the most balanced and the most symmetrical, this model. Is that why we are going to develop that comparison then in relation to point number 1, the temporal existential rhythm that is in relation to movement? Well, it would be the pulsations, and we have simplified here this scheme so that they can see that the person was achieved, that this is the simplest thing of everything, of the entire universe. All creation follows this same scheme at all its levels, which is the schemes of triunity, because it is a center and 2 poles, then and what yai in the cycles. Well, we have simplified it with this circle. The circle that would be the pulse, the tick, the other circle, and the tag. And we are going to explain why that is the cycle that we are going to see in respiration. We see it in circulation. We see it in the movement of the sun, in everything. That is the fundamental cycle of movement that creates this dimension. And we've said pulse, tick, pulse. And we represent through these schemes, this scheme, precisely that cycle. So as you can see, because it's two dualities, 2 pulsations, that we have the first and the second in this circle, and 2 movements, one movement that we call tig, like a clock, and another tag movement, because we are in relation to time, and time is also like a clock. We can say, then here they will already know. And for example, this is a tick that occurs, all the ticks that occur in this center, as you're seeing, and in this center. So that's the tick and the 0, the pulsation. The pulsations occur in the center, and the tick would be one path, and the CT would be the other path. So simple. Mind that this we are simply remembering. So here is this scheme that we can say press tip, press such, and then we say we have to differentiate in this scheme the point where you press, that this would be the point where you press, of the travel or cycle of the pulsations, which would be the tick and cat. So this would be the point where they pulse, and the tick would be one run, and the CT would be the other run. And they all converge at that point, as we already know, and then we also want to do so that they see the equivalences. We can also call it pulsation, which would be this little circuit, and we can also give this little circuit the name vacuum, but you will already know that our empty model is power. We say empty because I don't know, because it is something imperceptible, because it is the subtle of the subtle. So it would be, these 3 schemes are equivalent, tap tip, tap tag, or empty, you empty so simply, and here you are, seeing the cycle as we are going to go quickly, remembering then the pulse or the vacuum. This pulsation or vacuum that occurs here would also be equal to what is called the 0 point, from where all the steric energies are taken, the 0 point. And here at the 0 point is where they converge into is what a pulsation means. The 3 elements converge, the 2 poles converge with their center. That is why it pulses precisely, so that the creation continues. Because if it did not pulse, then everything would come together in itself. The source of the outside with the inside. That is, creation would be. Would it really disappear? Would disappear, since within the source, this external expedition, so simply then the equivalences. Can we then say what the T to C would be? Because what would the tick be here? Well, we have already said that the pulse bracelet would be the center, the tick would be the tick, and when the tick occurs, it would be the first pulse that is given at 6 o'clock, and this first pulse, the root, would be the root of the tick, which would be from 6 to 12 and to 6 p.m. and later. and the tag would then be from 6 p.m., 24 p.m., and again at 6. And so it would be tic-tac, so simple, so simply all levels. So the creative levels then, as we say, and the second pulse therefore, well, we have just said it. Well, it would be from here. Here the tag would occur, it would reach the maximum night and again until dawn. So if we want to see it in 3 points, well, for example, the second tag, since it would be from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., from 6 p.m. to 6 p.m., since it would have a maximum night point that would be 24 p.m., and the TI, its maximum light point, since it would be 12 noon, so simply. And then we are going to see that rhythm. So we are going to see those schemes already represented at more specific points, such as the point of breathing, so that the person has already done it previously with respect to the heart, the circulation, and the heartbeat. We have already done it previously, but now how that is more difficult to appreciate. What is easier to appreciate is the rhythm, which is equivalent, but in breathing, because that is easier for the person to perceive. We are going to see it in the breathing and the solar route, which will already know the movement and rhythm. So what would breathing be? Well, it would be pulsation. So expulsion would be when you neither inhale nor exhale. If you are not still, you are in an attitude of stillness, and then from there, well, then when you press, well, then you perform the tick, which would be inspiration. After the inspiration, you stop this. There is another moment in which you are static or empty, but we already know that it is not empty, and then you exhale. And then what would it be like? What would that look like? Fundamentally, because the point of the pulsation after inspiration would be that you take in air, you take in oxygen, more oxygen. And then, but then the change with carbon dioxide, with CO2 also occurs. So after the expiration, a moment of pause, and in that same pause is where the second pulse occurs. And then what? What's the matter? What's going on? That then you perform the exhalation, that is, you release the air outward, and then here it is predominantly the CO2 is predominant because you release more CO2 than oxygen. And so again, that is do it, practice it, and see. That is exactly that same rhythm. It is the same as that of the heart on another level, the fastest heart we can say. And it is the same thing that we are going to see in the movement of all the stars. Really here, they have the daily solar route that you will already know. The sun rises in the east, sets, rises to the maximum at 12, rises at 6, and then falls at 6. So here, where would the pulse be? Well, the pulse would be at 6, then at 6 it occurs. An ascent until 12, and then a descent until 6 p.m. That would be, then I would be here. So, what would then be the tick on this tour? Well, the tick would be from 6 to 6 p.m. and with a maximum elevation at 12 p.m. in the sun. And what would the CT scan be after the second pulse at precisely those 18 hours? Well, the CT scan would be from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. on the new day and in between the maximum night. On the 24th, everything is simply the same with the person. If he comes to see these schemes and understand them, then he will see that he will really come to understand where we are, and he will come to understand that he is moved by this heart that is the source. Because in the breath, we have a certain action. We can stop it or we can accelerate it, and obviously, but in the heart, we have much less action, because there it is above all the source that is making that heart move and beat. Really, and it corresponds to us, while the source is keeping us here, well, taking the maximum knowledge of itself, which is taking the knowledge of itself and of this entire universe then. Let's see, now we have, what we have seen previously was in relation to time, that is with movement, with pulsations. And now we're going to see that in relation to space, because in relation to space is form, physical form, and we have to highlight two schemes, the primary or more basic scheme, which is fundamental, which is this one we have here, because this would be the total form of the entire universe. But if you look at it, well, here it has a pole, one polarity, and here it has another. polarity, because everything has to be polar when it manifests. And then in this basic scheme, it is a therefore unitary scheme, because forum is a unit, and bipolar because it has two forums, because everything has to be bipolar. Then this would be one of the movements. This would be, for example, the TIG. Notice the inclination it has, and then the next movement after going to the center, well, it would be the tack. And look here, the orientation that he has taken, then it would be TIG. And you simply do the most basic scheme, and that most basic scheme that is made with a single spheroid, since it is also repeated and replicated when there are two spheroids, the same one here that we are going to see later, this is for you to see. So that you can see this more clearly, we have made a clearer drawing of this first basic scheme of the bipolar spheroid here. So this would be the tick. Notice this would be the horizontality and verticality of all existence. Notice that in the tick, it rises, the pole rises, we can say masculine up, and then the next, after the next pulse, the cat then goes down. That is, and then the one that rises is the female. So we are also going to see this in relation to what is called distributive justice, how there is no predominance of one pole or over another, but rather it is totally alternative. That is the distributive justice that we say. And so what we have seen previously was in a single, the most basic scheme, in a single spheroid, we can say the initial spheroid, well, this one, but like the general scheme, well, they would be two bipolar spheroids, which this is what we explained to us in a previous video, the whole station problem. So, but notice that it's exactly the same. What happens is that it is now done with 2.2 steroids. Therefore, that is the second scheme that would be, instead of a spheroid, since they are two steroids, and both are bipolar, obviously. So this would be presenting one spheroid, and this would be presenting the other spheroid, the two bipolars. But since one is inside others, well, this is the most expressive image. The sky spheroid would be the one that is inside, and the ground that we step on or concave is the one that is outside. And then this would be, for example, in the stations, they have already seen it in development, but are we going to now simplify it to the tick and tack? Well, then in the tick would be the part of the male hemisphere, the uppermost part, and in the CT, look, it would be in the lowermost part, the two most masculine parts, we can say, because that is the alternation which tells us that this is justice, that no, that there always exists an alternation. It does not always exist, always, as we are going to continue to see some. And another one below, no, they don't alternate. And so this is a superior aesthetic of the cosmos, toroidal Earth, in relation to the other theories that we would like the person to come to ours. Same conviction that it is a superior aesthetic, that it is the most aesthetic, and it is the most beautiful and beauty. It is usually also an attribute of truth, because truth must be beautiful, and we are no longer referring only to external beauty, but above all to the inner beauty that gives balance with source. That's why we say, and we are going to compare, that this is the most aesthetic. And why will it be the most aesthetic and most beautiful? Because it has certain characteristics that we are going to see. Yes, and what would be these characteristics of this cosmos, toroid Earth or cava toroid Earth? Well, the characteristics would be symmetry, because symmetry gives beauty, balance, and we have also put quotes because we have to explain what we say about ourselves. Distributive justice, which is alternation from one up once. And the next one, because you go down and the other one goes up. And so progressively, that to us is distributive justice. And here it is, but precisely also this model, well, look what it has. A continuity or an equivalence with what the shape of the torus is, which is the one that is the most perfect and also the most beautiful according to all our opinion. In addition to stable, we can also say then, as we have said, that it is symmetrical, because symmetry has it here, because it consists of dualities and symmetrical dualities such as the hemispheres. They have a northern hemisphere and a circsymmetric hemisphere, and it also has spheroids, a convex spheroid and a spheroid. Concave, so that for us is an attributes of that aesthetic, and we have said that it is also symmetrical since it is balanced, and that balance is a balance that we call a complementary dual balance. And we mean that then opposites like masculine and feminine and hemispheres and steroids, well, they're not exactly the same, but they're complementary. They are complementary because here we have seen what their birth is like. Here they have, for example, one within another, separated by a short distance, we can say, and then here they are represented more or less equal, but they are not exactly equal because, as we have said, the feminine is more inclusive, because then we have seen here the separation that is formed, and then that is why also the pole, the south pole opposite to Polaris, well, it is more difficult to find because it is broader, because then from the feminine it comes out and is detached. The masculine, therefore, is complementary, symmetrical, but not exactly the same, and that is balance, and balance is also beautiful. It is masculine beauty and feminine beauty. And then we have also said and continue to say that apart from that, well, it has this model, well, it has what we have had to invent, no? This word of distributive justice, that is positional alternation. Once the male hemisphere is up, as we're seeing here, both in a unipolar model, that is in a single spheroid model, and in a two spheroid model. So once the male hemisphere is up, as you're seeing here. For example, in the TIS, but the next one, the one at the top, is the TAC, since it is the female hemisphere. That is, once it rises and again it falls, and this alternating one is low, and it rises and it falls. And then that for us in motion, because it tells us that this is distributive justice compared to the other models that we are going to see that does not exist, which are mainly static models, and then one is always up and another is at work. That is why we are amazed to see how coherent and in all aspects of this model and in the aesthetics that we are sharing. And we're going to summarize it quickly so that you can see the differences that we say. The heliocentric model, for example, here we have it. Well, this heliocentric model, well, it lacks a general symmetry, because general symmetry would be the Earth in our cosmos. Look, it's at one extreme. It doesn't have any symmetrical part with everything they tell us about everything else, universe. And it also lacks distributive justice in the sense that always in the static part of what we have here, the model, because always in one part it is above, in the Tropic of Cancer, we can say, and another always in the Tropic of Capricorn, in the lower part. And then some flat screen therapists have said, well, why do I always have to be on my back and the others always on their back, in a naive way that some flat screen therapists also tend to say. Well then, is this for us? Well, it really is not justice. It is not distributive justice compared to our model. Our model is not that it is always one up, I work. No, it does not alternate. It alternates in a wonderful and beautiful way. So the flat Earth model, because it also lacks, because what we say is unbalanced and is an isolated half. Therefore, if it is a half and is isolated, then it is no longer symmetrical. You can see here that it's not symmetrical. It only has one part. It doesn't have the symmetry, and we say unbalanced because, of course, precisely the balance consists of two poles, because it would be unbalanced. And then here, as you are seeing, because there would be closer and more permanent parts in relation to the center of power, which would be a single pole, for example, this entire part of the Tropic of Cancer, because it would be much closer to the source, we could say, or to the pole, or to the force, or to whatever you want to say, and the entire other part, such as Argentina, because it would be much further away. And that for us is an imbalance, and it is not. What is that distributive justice that we can say and have already explained in our model, which is not that it is not like that. And the same thing happens to him, because that is also why our aesthetics of the teratoid cosmos for us is the superior aesthetics, because in the model of the concave cellular Earth, because what is also lacking is also distributive justice. They are seeing us here because inside, always in the concave spheroid, because it always remains static and always has an upper part, just as it seems to the official system, and always has another part, lower. Then with a dual arrangement of top and bottom, but permanent. And our model precisely, since it is not permanent, alternates in a wonderful way. Therefore, we have to end here, and we want the person to reflect. also the person who is intuitive to see and what the most equitable, fairest, most beautiful model is like, obviously according to the entire discernment. We are going to make a final synthesis here that we are going to repeat in the last video that we are going to make of this brief description of this model. We say that the vibration, because look, here is the tick and the tag we can say, in a single spheroid, the same as in the heart, because the heart we have so one alone. And what does the heart do? The heart makes a vibration, it ticks, a very fast vibration, which is the same as this movement that you're seeing here, tick tick, but in a very fast. And then we say that the vibration of the heart represents the shortest circuit. Because in previous videos we have already seen that within that same cycle, well, there are other cycles that are even faster and more imperceptible. Well, it represents the vibration of the heart. It represents the shortest, fastest, imperceptible circuit. Because it does not become imperceptible and subtle that it sustains all the longest, slowest, perceptible and dense circuits, all the circuits in the universe. That's what the heart holds. That in relation to time and movement. So in a timeless time, because it would be instantaneous, it would be so fast that it would be the instantaneity of the source in a timeless time. We say so that the person thinks about it. All times, all cycles are sustained since they are sustained in a timeless time. In something instantaneous, which is that it is something almost inconceivable to our mind, but that we are getting closer to that concept when we are seeing exactly how the cycles are produced, especially inside the heart, that in relation to movement, but now in relation to what is perceptible with space, we say that in a subtle and imperceptible space, because the source is imperceptible, in a subtle and imperceptible space, everything dense and perceptible is seen. We end here wishing strength for all humans who are already in a position to distinguish the good from the evil that is occurring at these very moments. And we want you to keep hope. We can say so, a dimensional hope. When we come to know the ship that is sinking, but that can never sink totally, one form would be quickly replaced by another, which is existence, because we are in existence and connected to the source of existence.